Chapter 179. Something big is going to happen. Soren's figure stood in the distance. Next to him was a dark attic, and nearby was a gathering place for prostitutes. He silently watched the paladins in the distance, as well as the poor people kneeling in front of them. He suddenly felt a sense of foreboding. Every time a paladin appeared, it meant the beginning of a massacre, which could eventually evolve into a destructive disaster that would turn the whole city into a river of blood. Because the paladins could not tolerate evil, and evil was a part of the world. The paladins were the most special group of professionals. They firmly believed in order and kindness, and they had strong will and faith. Becoming a paladin was far more difficult than becoming a wizard. It was not just a matter of talent, but more importantly, whether you believed in justice and kindness in your heart. Without faith and justice, the paladins would quickly fall and their power would disappear. They might become an ordinary warrior, or they might fall and become a dark warrior. Pursue kindness, protect justice, and destroy evil. These were the three tenets of the paladins. Very few people could achieve the faith, courage, and kindness of a paladin. Therefore, the number of paladins in the world might be even fewer than wizards. Most of the knights were inclined to the good camp, and at most, they would advance to the field of temple guardian knights. These temple knights might be kind, brave, and believe in justice, but they were not as extreme as the paladins. They would not be so paranoid that they could not tolerate any evil. They were a group of great people, but also a group of sad people. Soren respected all the paladins, even if they would be his enemies, because he almost joined the paladins' camp. Unfortunately, he chose another dark path in the end. The first belief of the paladins was justice and kindness, and the second belief was God. Therefore, when the Silver Hand said, "As long as the paladins are alive, justice will last forever," Soren realized that a great purge was about to begin. The Silver Hand probably already had plans to fall out with the Church of the Goddess of Wealth. He would kill anyone who stopped him from pursuing justice and kindness without mercy. The paladins killed a lot of people. This profession was very powerful. They had the ability of a warrior, could cast divine spells, and were protected by holy energy. They were forever immune to diseases and could ignore any fear. Sacred samurai were naturally immune to fear-type spells, immune to disease-type spells, and could cast healing divine spells. This was the only class that could summon mounts from the outer planes. Moreover, it was possible to summon Pegasi, male, and Unicorn, female. Moreover, it was easy to ride them. No matter which city it was, there would always be people who committed crimes. Dark organizations, gang members, gray areas, officials, nobles, and so on. Not to mention the current world. Even in Soren's previous life, if paladins were allowed to clean up evil, a large number of people would be executed. Corrupt officials, judges who disregarded human lives, deceitful businessmen, black-hearted fake medicine, poisonous food, and so on. These people were at most sentenced to death in the eyes of the Saint Samurai, but they were heinous criminals who had harmed thousands of people. They were the kind that could be put to death directly. This was the City of Wealth. Almost none of the people in power in the City of Wealth were clean. Corpses could be seen in the sewers here every day. Even the kindler here could smell the smell of blood and filth. The Saint Samurai were rarely dispatched, but their appearance meant a great purge. Because there was a sentence in the creed of the Saint Samurai, you can't ignore evil, chaos, and sin. Even if you have to pay with your life, you must guard the side of justice and kindness. If they died, their souls would return to the upper planes. Whether it was Mountain Paradise of the Seven Heavens, or Twin Paradise of Eden, they would welcome the arrival of these noble souls. In other words, the Saint Samurai were not afraid of death. These guys were destined to go to Mountain Paradise after death. Even if they died in some evil rituals or their souls were blasphemed, as long as their faith was still firm and they did not commit any sins, the legendary Holy Spirit of Heaven would personally come to receive their souls. It was difficult for people to evaluate the Saint Samurai. Some people loved them and regarded them as the light of hope, as the embodiment of justice, but there were also people who hated them and wished they could disappear forever. How many people loved them? How many people resented them? The deeper the love, the deeper the hatred. Soren had a neutral attitude towards the Saint Samurai. He did not want to kill them like other evil people. If there was evil in the world, there was justice. He believed that the world also needed such a group of people. As long as the Saint Samurai did not detect evil randomly, Soren could even bow slightly to show respect after seeing them. But if they detect evil randomly, Soren would draw his sword in an instant. There was once a story. In the story, a Saint Samurai entered an adventurer's tavern and immediately quieted down the place. This young Saint Samurai suddenly detect evil, and then in an instant 1/3 of the people in the tavern drew their swords, 1/3 of the people in the tavern were ready to retreat, and 1/3 of the people in the tavern were shocked and uneasy. In the eyes of the noble women, the Saint Samurai was the best lover. However, in the eyes of the noble women, the Saint Samurai was the last in the list of husband candidates, even lower than the barbarians. The noble women hoped to have a lover who was trustworthy, brave, steadfast, and loyal. They would even seduce the Saint Samurai and see it as proof of their charm. However, almost no women were willing to marry a Saint Samurai, and they did not want their husband to be a Saint Samurai. It was a very ironic thing. A large number of Saint Samurai would never marry, and they would not be easily seduced by women, because it was easy to fall under temptation. They liked to adopt orphans, teach them justice and kindness, and raise them to become Saint Samurai from a young age. Being able to make a Saint Samurai fall was also something that the noble women loved to talk about. Therefore Saint Samurai rarely appeared. City Hall. An angry roar was heard, and the roof trembled slightly. Inside the hall was a very strong man with a shiny body. He was wearing a lot of gold jewelry, and there was an expensive jewelry necklace around his neck. 6 of his 10 fingers were wearing all kinds of expensive rings. At this moment he was roaring at a row of people in front of him and said angrily, "Bastards! Idiots! Why didn't you idiots stop them? I really want to wring your heads off. You bunch of swine beasts. You actually believed that the group of Saint Samurai was only here to track down the Son of Fear. Don't you know that the places where the Saint Samurai appeared were all disasters? What do we do now?" All the untouchables ran over to complain. When the time comes, the Saint Samurai will detect evil on a large scale. All of you idiots will be slaughtered one by one. A group of officials and nobles stood in the hall with cold sweat. One of the big-bellied guys hesitated and whispered, "Your Excellency, we can't stop them." This time it's the silver hand that appeared. Clang. The strong man smashed the chair directly over, and the fat official's head was full of blood. He lost half of his life. Bastard. He let out an angry roar and shouted, "What do we do now? If that group of stubborn people is determined to purify evil, the city of wealth will become the city of death." Sir Carlos, your fleet has done a lot of pirate things, right? And you, Baron Mosley, you take tens of thousands of kindler every year from the gray income of the city of wealth, right? Your son recently forced a pair of untouchables, mother and daughter, to death, right? And you. Which one of you guys doesn't have a butt full of blood debts? Which one of your juniors hasn't stained their hands with blood? One detect evil and all of you will be covered in blood. Damn it, this is the city of wealth, not the damn city of holy light. Every kindler here is stained with blood. You idiots actually let the Saint Samurai into the city? Don't you know that they are all crazy? A middle-aged man dressed as a noble hesitated for a moment, then his expression turned cold and he said in a deep voice, "How about we take all these Saint Samurai?" At this point he made a throat-cutting gesture. Clang. The strong man picked up another chair and smashed it over, roaring, "Stupid pig! What do you think the Silver Knights are? Was he a pig waiting to be slaughtered? That team of Saint Samurai just now can't be defeated without an elite legion of more than 300 people. Do you want to start a war in the city of wealth? Not to mention that there is still the Silver Hand here. Do you want to provoke a battle of legends? How do you think the reputation of the Silver Hand came about? In the southernmost kingdom this guy even cut down the king. You're just a baron and you're nothing. Unless the Temple of Wealth makes a move, he can kill all of us by himself." Southern Principality. Since the destruction of the Arcane Empire, there had not been a strong empire in the south for thousands of years. It was more like a city-state system, but under the name of a kingdom, there were many smaller principalities. There were quite a lot of royal family members within the human race, but their control in the kingdom was limited to their own territory in the kingdom, and they were also in theft to their own subordinates. Nearly half of the cities in the entire southern region were controlled by nobles, parliaments, and temples. They were inextricably linked. The battle that made the Silver Hand famous. It was he who single-handedly challenged a kingdom and almost killed a cruel tyrant of lawful evil, forcing him to forcibly abdicate to his kindest and youngest son. After this battle, no one did not know the Silver Hand. Chapter 180. What do we do now? One of the old aristocrats frowned and said slowly, "Over the years, mines, trade, slaves, black markets, none of us have not touched them. Everyone is more or less stained with blood. If those lunatics really do mess around, I'm afraid we will be implicated. Can we ask the Temple of Wealth to expel them? It's not a problem to spend more money." Towards this old man, the strong man's attitude was obviously much better. He said slowly, "I'm afraid it's difficult. The goddess of wealth is neutral. Her priests and churches are also neutral. It's impossible to deal with the paladins. It's tantamount to telling the world that they have leaned towards the evil camp. What's more, the Silver Hand has the artifact, Star of Day. That artifact was given to him by the Holy Spirit of the God of Light. If the Temple of Wealth dares to attack the Silver Hand, it's tantamount to a frontal war with the God of Light. At that time, not only the paladins will come, but I'm afraid the clergy army will also come." Clergy. They were more of a headache than the paladins. Although they were not so extreme, their numbers were quite large. These guys were mainly active in the glorious city. Occasionally they would help fight against the evil drows, but their main energy was still on demons and devils. They were quite tolerant of the evil in the secular world. After all, the ruling class must exploit the civilians. As long as their table manners were not too ugly and there was no outrageous behavior, they would pretend not to see it. Otherwise, they would not be able to control it at all. The paladins were rarely dispatched. The reason was that they could not ignore evil. But if they went out and met a victim, what if the other party asked the paladins for help? Ignore him? That was against the path of the paladins. Help him? How much could the paladins change? The order of the world was like this. If an evil person was killed, would there not be a new one? As long as the interest and power were there would always be people who would be corrupted and depraved. A kingdom had a wise king and a tyrant. Could the paladins overthrow a kingdom because of a tyrant? After all, the Silver Hand was a special case. He had the artifact in his hand. He was the most powerful paladin. He was also the descendant of the God of Light. At the end of the day, it was still a matter of strength. Today the paladins were not strong enough. As long as these people dared to detect evil, the dark domain and the gray domain would kill them all. But it was because the strength of the paladins that appeared this time was too strong, so strong that even the City of Wealth did not dare to act rashly, so strong that the Church of Wealth did not dare to expel them, so such a headache occurred. A group of poor people sought justice from them and they could not go against their beliefs. In the end, it became a situation where they had to do something. Ignoring evil went against the faith of the Saint Samurai. Fighting against evil was almost equivalent to becoming an enemy of the entire City of Wealth. That was why Soren felt sorry for the paladins. Paladins don't have the right to judge nobles. A man with a cold and gentle face suddenly said, "The Church of the God of Light will not allow paladins to wage war against nobles. The wealth that we have accumulated over the generations has always come from killing. Mines, slaves, and the black market. Even if we don't do them, someone else will take over. At that time, the City of Wealth will no longer be the City of Wealth." I think the Silver Hand also understands this. If they have the ability, they can go and purify the abyss of hell. Our sins are not worth mentioning at all when compared to the devils and demons. At least we maintain the order of the city so that those untouchables work and have food to eat, and not completely become a place of chaos and killing. If we didn't maintain the law, that group of untouchables may not even have the days they have now. The pirates, adventurers, and the fallen from all directions, which one doesn't covet the wealth here? These words caused a lot of agreement. There were even nobles who shouted that if they did not provide protection to the poor and provide land for farming, these untouchables would all starve to death and all of them would be eaten by monsters. The strong man thought for a moment and slowly said, "The problem is not these. It's how we deal with these paladins now. They won't give up or they will go against their beliefs." The cold man looked around and slowly said, "Scapegoats. The leaders of those gangs responsible for the slave trade, the black market trade, and the organizations that are obviously not very obedient, we can catch them and use them as scapegoats. These people are all blood debts and we can use the hands of the paladins to eradicate them. This will appease those untouchables and also give the paladins an explanation. I don't think the Silver Hand is crazy enough to judge the nobles of the entire City of Wealth, right? The last thing the ruling class lacked was lawful evil. They were not as cruel as the devils, but not many of the things they handled were good and noble. There's more." The cold man stood up and looked around and said in a deep voice, "We must find the demigod vampire as soon as possible. It was because of him that this group of paladins was attracted. If we don't get rid of him, this group of paladins may stay for a longer time. I propose to send the army to search for his traces, and then let the Silver Hand deal with him." This sentence made the surroundings silent for a moment, and then the others nodded and said, "Yes. We must find the Son of Fear. Otherwise the paladins will not leave so easily." The cause of all this was the demigod vampire. If he had not run to the City of Wealth, the paladins would not have come to chase him, the poor would not have sought justice from them, and the nobles would not have fallen into such an embarrassing situation. If there was no silver hand, it would be a small problem to just send some people to expel the paladins or even make them disappear. But since the silver hand had appeared, some attitudes must be made clear. If the aristocratic council was willing to help him deal with the demigod vampire, then the paladins would not be crazy enough to put them on trial. Could it be that the world would be in chaos? Good. The strong man slapped the table and said in a deep voice, "Send out the garrison, send out the city legion. Search the city of wealth thoroughly, we must find the demigod vampire. Then catch those disobedient guys, we don't need the paladins to do it, we will execute these guys according to the law. We can't break the rules of the city of wealth just because of the appearance of the paladins. As for those untouchables, there will be time to deal with them later." Speaking of this, the strong man showed a cruel smile. It was impossible for him not to be angry in his heart when a group of untouchables unintentionally used the paladins as a tool to force him into such a situation. Orders were issued one by one. The cold man at the beginning could not help but show a smile, and a strange light appeared in his eyes. "This should be able to force you out, right? Stupid guy. Do you think you can suppress everything with strength? I'd like to see if you can die this time." A conspiracy had begun to brew. When the paladins appeared, they had become a knife. The weak used this knife to seek justice, and the evil used this knife to deal with the enemy. The paladins were a sad profession and a very fragile profession. As long as a kind and honest victim was found to ask them for help, then they would have to face a choice. Should they help or not? If they did not help, they would kneel in front of you, hold your thigh and kowtow. At that time, would you help or not? It was okay not to help once, but after 2 or 3 times their faith would collapse. That was why there were so many former paladins in this world. There was no problem in helping. There were many people in this world who needed help. There were ordinary people who were harmed by gangs, and poor people who were oppressed and bullied by nobles. In this world there are powerful forces everywhere. If you help a poor and kind-hearted person get rid of the gangsters who destroyed his family, then why don't you get rid of the gangsters at the same time? After this gang was eradicated, would you also eliminate the officials and nobles behind the scenes? After you maintained justice and left, it would not be long before a second gang appeared. How many times could you fight? How many people could you defeat? Retreating was a decline in faith. The power of the paladins would become that of ordinary warriors. If you could not tolerate evil, evil would naturally not tolerate you. Want to maintain justice? It was too simple. There were bullies and bad guys in every town. A detection of evil would immediately identify those who had killed innocent civilians. Could you kill them all? How much evil could you judge? The paladins were very powerful but also very weak. They could not change the world. They could only protect the justice in their hearts in the difficult path. That was why there was sadness in the eyes of those older paladins. Because they had been tested again and again, not only in strength but also in heart and will. Without the silver hand they were nothing at all. 1 silver hand could force the city of wealth to compromise. 2 silver hands could cleanse the city of wealth of evil and corruption. 3 silver hands could reformulate the rules of the city of wealth and make it closer to the rules of order and good. 5 silver hands could turn the city of wealth into the next glory city. Unfortunately, there was always only 1 silver hand. They could not change the city of wealth, nor could they change the world. The abyss and hell had existed for countless years. How many good gods had fought for it? The god of light regarded it as a cancer and launched many wars in the kingdom of God. What was the final result? The abyss was still the abyss and hell was still hell. The paladins were such a group of stubborn and pitiful people who stuck to their faith. They could only believe in the justice in their hearts and could not make the world become righteous. Because the world was the world and they were still too weak. Soren seemed to have seen something. He heard the horn of the army and could see the emergency assembly of the city guards. The garrison had begun to set off. It seemed that the aristocratic forces of the city of wealth had made a compromise. They began to carry out the cleansing in their own way to prevent the paladins from destroying the order here. Small-scale cleansing to appease the civilians in exchange for the paladins not to make a move. This was undoubtedly a very smart choice. It seemed that the aristocrats of the city of wealth were not simple. Chapter 181. It was a very restless night. Soren heard the sound of fighting and explosions, and there were fires in some places. The city of wealth, which was originally rich and relatively orderly, had now become a place of chaos. None of the gangs in the evil faction were simple characters. They were all violent and evil members. Their equipment and strength may not be as good as the city guards, but they could definitely cause chaos if they fought desperately. No one would be naive enough to think that these bloody people would surrender without a fight. It was impossible for them to do so without a fight. A curfew began to be imposed on the streets, and the city guards lit torches to open a line of defense to avoid the chaos affecting ordinary people. There were sounds of cursing and crying everywhere. Their originally relatively peaceful life was broken, and many people locked the doors and windows tightly to prevent the chaos outside from affecting their families. There were traces of rogues shuttling in the dark. Rogues had always been the backbone of the gray area. From time to time, the screams of the city guards could be heard. In the dark, they could not easily deal with rogues above grade 2. Soren's figure was hidden in the shadows. He stood on a clock tower and looked at the city in front of him. In just the middle of the night, this bustling city revealed a sense of depression. There was a fire in a warehouse in the dock area, and the city guards were controlling the spread of the fire. Sporadic fighting occurred everywhere, and there were members of the Umbral realm trying to escape. The fire seemed to have spread a little, and there were cries and howls in the direction of the slums. The paladins had also joined the battle, but the southwest corner of the slums had been set on fire. It was not known whether it was because of the chaos or because of the deliberate revenge of the Umbral realm. Their behavior today would undoubtedly make many people hate them. The City of Wealth was a very prosperous city, but these prosperity were also evil prosperity. Now that some people were being purged, their armed forces would inevitably resist. In the future, the trade of the entire City of Wealth would be affected. Ordinary people in the lower class would lose their jobs, and there would be less smuggling trade and black market trade. In the next few months, nearly 30% of the dock workers would be unemployed. Then they would not have a good new year this year. Sigh. Soren sighed softly and said slowly, "Sure enough, it will only turn into a farce in the end." The City of Wealth compromised, and so did the paladins. The victims did not get the justice they deserved because they were too weak. Perhaps in the future the evil forces in the City of Wealth would be restrained a lot, but the current chaos would also affect and change their lives. They might not be able to live well in the future, but it was certain that the present and future days would be very difficult. The purge of the paladins would severely hit the trade of the City of Wealth, cutting off smuggling, slavery, and black market trade. Who knew how many people would lose their jobs as a result? These poor people who had lost their jobs would have an even harder time. They might even have to sell their children. The wealth was still here. However, it would be transferred to the hands of the strong and would never fall into the pockets of the weak. Temporary justice was nothing but a false justice. Soren's figure shuttled through the darkness. His agile shadow leaped from roof to roof, covering a distance of more than 10 meters in an instant. He shuttled through the darkness like a ghost, searching for his target. This was a time of chaos, and it was also a time to take advantage of the situation. There were many people who had the same goal as him. Whether or not they could get a sum of money from those organizations that had been purged would depend on their own strength. Taking chestnuts out of the fire. People in the evil camp were never afraid to take risks. They were originally in a dangerous industry. The City of Wealth was too rich. Those organizations that had mastered smuggling trade and so on had accumulated more than 100,000 Kindler coins. This wealth was enough for many people to take risks and take advantage of the chaos to get a sum of money. They could easily get thousands of Kindler coins. This income was comparable to an adventure. If they were more evil, they could even rob ordinary people directly. Anyway, after the event, they could push the blame to those organizations. Without order, evil would descend. Daughter. Mira. My Mira. A man with blood-red eyes stood in front of the fire. He was wearing tattered clothes and his thick arms showed that he often worked. He looked at the house that had turned into a sea of fire and let out a sad howl. There were no living people inside. The fire was so strong that his wife and daughter couldn't run out. No. The middle-aged man let out a shrill howl and rushed to a white-haired old man next to him. His whole body was trembling. He grabbed the old man's neck and lifted him up. He roared, "It's all your fault. It's all your fault. If you didn't beg the paladins, those bad guys wouldn't retaliate against us. My daughter wouldn't have died. You damned old ghost. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you." Bang. A young paladin raised his hand and knocked him out. The old man suddenly fell to the ground. He looked at the sea of fire in front of him. His face was full of tears. It seemed that he didn't think that things would turn out like this. He murmured like a fool, "Why did it turn out like this? Why did it turn out like this?" The young paladin also had a complicated expression. He also didn't think that things would turn out like this. In the end, it led to an uncontrollable chaos. He didn't know how many innocent people died in this chaos. For the first time he doubted his faith. He doubted whether the justice he upheld was right or not. Because after the chaos spread, they couldn't stop it, even if they had great power. Firm faith. An older paladin appeared behind him. The other party raised his hand and patted him on the shoulder. In a deep voice he said, "There must be sacrifices to maintain justice." "Why did it turn out like this?" The young man murmured in a low voice. There was a trace of sadness and regret in his eyes. He was full of passion and justice. Why did he kill so many people? Why did the maintenance of justice turn into a war in the end? How many people did this war have to kill before it ended? Devil? Shrill screams echoed over the city. Everyone was dead silent for a moment. Then the paladins turned into shadows and rushed in the direction of the sound. Detect evil. In the end they still used this spell. The power of the sacred samurai began to spread, and a faint aura appeared on the bodies of everyone nearby. Many of them were white but more were gray. There were also many pale red, dark red and blood red auras. For a long time, these ordinary people worked for the evil, carried goods for them, guarded forbidden goods for them and covered up their sins. Under the aura of the paladins, these people were also guilty, but their sins were very light. They were all gray areas. These people walked between good and evil. They may not be aware of the crime, but they were part of the evil. In the fire all over the sky, a trace of blood appeared in the city of wealth. The wealth accumulated here for a long time was also accompanied by sin. Finally, under the detect evil, it turned into a blood-red light and rose into the sky. The power of the aura of the spell was no longer under the control of the paladins. The supernatural power gathered on its own for some reason, turning the whole sky into a bloody light. The devil had come. No one knew who had summoned the demons, but from the moment they appeared, a frenzied massacre had already begun. Perhaps the more evil existence hidden in the city of wealth had long noticed this place. They had been waiting for an opportunity to cause chaos and slaughter. The appearance of the paladins was an opportunity. The good people turned the paladins into a knife to fight against the evil. How could the evil not use this knife to sow discord and stimulate more violent contradictions? No one could stop it. In the fire, a 3 or 4 meter tall Hezru appeared. It let out a crazy laugh and waved a battle axe to cut a group of civilians in half. There was only killing and satisfaction in the eyes of the devil. Even Soren was not willing to deal with these guys. From the moment they arrived, they had been satisfying their thirst for slaughter. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of people were killed. Heads rolled in the ruins and severed limbs were everywhere. Fresh blood dyed the ground red. Bastards. The strong man led the army and roared in grief and anger. He roared, "That group of damned paladins. That group of damned degenerates. My city of wealth. Send someone to the temple to ask for support. Go. Idiots. Go and ask the Saint Necromancer to help." Quasits, demon-hunting spiders, Vrox, Hezru and four-armed snake demons. The figures of the devils appeared from the fire. They howled excitedly and rushed toward the city in front of them. The glory of the paladins was so small in the face of evil. These devils whose strength exceeded grade 3 and above were like a wild current. In an instant they crushed the city army in front of them and then crazily slaughtered any creatures in front of them. Ah! A distorted shadow appeared in the fire. It turned into a ferocious figure and slowly stood up in the fire. It laughed and said, "Stupid mortals. Finally, the moment has come. This evil city should have been sublimated in the fire long ago. I heard the cries of the souls. Bring them to hell and I will be stronger. I'll let these idiotic demons kill first. The devils are the real victors." The distorted shadow gradually turned solid. A devil stood up in the raging fire. It did not join the battle in front of it, nor did it vent its desire to kill. Instead, it walked directly into the sea of fire. The scorching flames did not seem to hurt it at all. It disappeared in the fire little by little as if it was brewing a new conspiracy. Chapter 182. Demons? Soren's jumping figure suddenly stopped. He turned back and looked into the distance. The fire had gradually spread to the point where it was almost out of control. He didn't have any detection spells, so he couldn't see the situation behind him. But after hearing the shouts, he found that the army of the City of Wealth was gathering behind him, and there were also some priests who appeared in a hurry. The priests of the City of Wealth, who had intended to stay out of it, finally decided to suppress the chaos. No. Soren jumped onto the chimney, then frowned and said, "Demons don't have such a big hand. It's obvious that someone has aggravated the conflict. Are there still demons lurking here? Only demons could be so powerful. These guys like to play with people's hearts the most. If they took advantage of the appearance of the paladins, combined with the power of suggestion and other spells, they could be used to provoke the people of the Dark Faction and the Grey Domain. Then it would easily evolve into a war. The evil ones who were unwilling to wait for death would unite to resist. Once they resisted desperately, the scale of the battle would escalate. It was possible that other people would be involved in it, and finally, it would become a chaotic slaughter. Where are the legends? Soren stood on a high place and looked at the whole city, murmuring, "Why haven't the legends made a move yet? Would they let things get to this point? What about the Silver Hand? He's not a stupid person. Where is he now?" The chaos was spreading. The city's army was facing the summoned demons. These summoned demons were still summoning more demons. A Hezru with a spell-like ability actually found dozens of dretches. A four-armed snake demon with a profession level of more than grade 4 and close to the legends was rampaging. The snake moved at an amazing speed. 4 giant swords slashed through the sky. Wherever it passed, there were corpses everywhere. Except for the legends, almost no one could stop it. The four-armed snake demon's creature level was 18, which was already above the middle grade. Greater dual-wielding, greater multi-strike, greater cleave, greater slam, intermediate spell resistance, intermediate damage reduction, poison immunity, greater strong acid resistance, combined defense with offense, battle reflection. A series of abilities made the four-armed snake demon's danger level rise. It was simply a highly mobile killing machine. Soren stopped moving forward. The situation had begun to get out of control. It was very dangerous here. Dong dong dong. Soren's body suddenly swayed and he almost fell off the roof. His heart started to beat faster and his heart rate was 50% higher than before. His heart was squeezing and blood was flowing all over his body, exposing his blood vessels to his skin. Soren's body temperature was rising bit by bit. His eyes were bloodshot and his pupils were dilating. This feeling lasted for about 3 minutes, and then Soren's condition recovered little by little. "Vivian?" Soren seemed to have sensed something and mumbled, "She's here too." The sound of weeping came from the alley ahead. Soren frowned as he looked around. Then, he gently landed on the ground and glanced in that direction. He couldn't help but take half a step back and reach out to grab his scimitar because the person in front of him was a young Saint Samurai. The Saint Samurai was wearing a silver-white knight's armor, and there were some scars on it. There was a faint holy power around the blade of his sword, and drops of blood were dripping down. The young Saint Samurai didn't seem to notice Soren. His body was trembling slightly and he stabbed his sword into the ground. Then, as if he was trembling, he stretched out his hands and picked up a petite body. It was a little girl who was at most 10 years old. She was the victim in this mess, an innocent and pitiful little girl who died in this mess. Then there was a faint sound of weeping. The young Saint Samurai trembled as he picked up the little girl's body. His eyes were blank and his face was full of regret and helplessness. He let out a suppressed and soundless roar and murmured in a sorrowful voice, "Why did this happen? Why did this happen? Aren't we protecting justice? Why did we kill so many people? Why?" Tears fell drop by drop. The Saint Samurai in front of him cried like a child whose hope was shattered. Perhaps he really wasn't that old. Judging from his face, he was at most 20 years old. Soren had a little impression of this Saint Samurai. It was the young Saint Samurai who spoke first during the day. At this moment, the holy power on his body was already wavering, like a candle flame that could be extinguished at any time. His faith was shaken. If he couldn't stand firm in his beliefs, then he would lose the power of a Saint Samurai and become an ordinary warrior. His faith was close to collapse. He didn't understand why things had turned out this way. He didn't understand why so many people had died. He cried like a child. Because he was just a young Saint Samurai. He might be kind and hot-blooded, but he was still too young. He was crying. It wasn't because he was weak, but because he was sad. He might not be afraid of bloodshed, evil, or death, but he was afraid of what he saw in front of him. All of this happened because of them. Because of their actions to uphold justice, they started a killing war, causing the entire city to fall into chaos, causing many innocent people to lose their lives in this war. He lost his way. He didn't know if the justice he believed in was still justice. Soren was silent. The light on the young Saint Samurai's body was getting dimmer and dimmer. He was about to lose the power of his faith. The holy power was leaving this young man because his heart was full of confusion. "Because you're not strong enough." Soren suddenly spoke. He woke up the Saint Samurai in front of him, but the Saint Samurai didn't pick up his weapon. He just looked at him with blank eyes, still holding the little girl's body. Soren looked at him with pity and said slowly, "Because you're still too weak. You don't have the power to destroy evil, but you started a war between good and evil. Your ignorant actions will only bring about slaughter and death. It will only destroy the order and kill more innocent people. What do you have to fight evil? You're not as strong as the demons. You're not as cunning as the demons. Those evil people have countless insidious and cunning means. Unless you have the power to completely crush them, the justice you've always believed in is just a joke. The fallen used you to start a war. They achieved their goal, but you have to bear the sin." The light on the young Saint Samurai dissipated. His eyes were full of endless pain and regret. He held the little girl's body tightly in his arms and let out an angry roar. The young man had lost the power of a Saint Samurai. There was a strange light in Soren's eyes. He looked at the young man in front of him and said in a deep voice, "You're not strong enough. You're not cunning enough. You don't even know what evil is. How can you protect justice? If you're strong enough, stronger than a legend, you'll be able to stop everything that's happening tonight. You'll be able to destroy the fallen as easily as crushing dry weeds. If you're cunning enough, more cunning than the demons, you can use other means to destroy them. They won't have the chance to weave a conspiracy, and they won't have the chance to stir up chaos and slaughter. You're just a pathetic puppet. An idiot who thinks that by believing in justice, you can change the world. You'll only make the world worse." Every sentence was like a sharp knife piercing his heart. The young Saint Samurai trembled. He seemed to be struggling, but he gradually understood something. The silver armor on his body gradually dimmed, and the holy power on the knight's sword dissipated. Gradually, a strange aura appeared. He stretched out his hand and slowly grasped the hilt of the sword. He whispered in a hoarse voice, "As long as I'm stronger than them and more cunning than them, I can destroy them?" Soren's expression was quite playful. He said in a deep voice, "Yes. This is just the beginning of chaos. The world will become worse in the future. You can't do anything without power. Give up those pathetic creeds. If you really believe in justice, then you must fall into evil. Only evil can fight against evil. Go and find your own path, young man. There's a group of beings called the Holy Avengers. They will show you the way." Soren's figure disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind a young man who had lost the power of a Saint Samurai. He slowly picked up the cold body of the little girl, and then pulled out the long sword that was emitting a strange aura. The power of a Saint Samurai didn't seem to have disappeared, but it had changed into another kind of power. He turned around and walked into the darkness. The silver-white armor became mottled in the darkness. The holy power that was originally attached to it had dissipated due to the dissipation of faith. The darkness shrouded the silver-white armor. It could cause him to fall and become an evil dark guardian, or it could also allow him to find new justice. He had fallen. But it didn't seem like he had fallen. This was a battle of faith and will. There was no blood in this battle. If he won, he would become a legend in the future. If he lost, he would lose himself. This was the Saint Samurai that Soren wanted to see. They were also the Saint Samurai who fought on the front line. 3 million Saint Samurai held up the backbone of the world. They couldn't change the world, but they stopped the gods from breaking the world into pieces. Welcome to the lawful evil. You should be qualified to be the Holy Avengers. Perhaps the glory of the Saint Samurai would never appear in this world again, but Soren hoped to see the Holy Avengers in the time of troubles. It was time for them to appear. Good and evil weren't that important. Chaos was the real disaster. P.S. I've been writing the plot very slowly recently. I have to edit it from time to time. I've been keeping the minimum 2 chapters. Chapter 183. The Holy Avenger. A very special advanced profession. This name originated from a weapon called the Holy Avenger. It was hard to say whether it was a divine artifact or not. It was only known that it was stronger than the divine artifact, Star of Day. Unfortunately, it had been lost in history. At that time, the legendary paladin who held this weapon had experienced a lot. No one knew what exactly he had experienced. They only knew that he fell in the end and became the first Holy Avenger. In that era, the god of light was still the king of dawn. Not long after the chaos of dawn, the goddess of luck and the god of decay died because of the king of dawn's stubbornness. Then, the goddess of luck and the goddess of misfortune were separated from the corpses. The gods also tried to stop his selfless, passionate, and stubborn beliefs to prevent him from causing more damage to the world. Unfortunately, the gods still could not stop the chaos of dawn. After the death of the goddess of luck, the goddess of misfortune and the goddess of fortune caused the gods to split again. Knowledge, the birth of the twin goddesses. From then on, the camp of the king of dawn had already deviated. He went from neutral good to lawful good. In the end, the most powerful god of light was born. His children inherited the priesthood of the light of dawn, and he replaced the god of justice as the most powerful god in the lawful good camp. The second belief of the paladins also began to deviate towards him. Now, the paladins who believed in the god of justice were far less than the paladins who believed in the god of light. After the king of dawn became the god of light, Mother Earth began to retire. The goddess of agriculture replaced her as the new god. No one knew what happened during that period, but so far the god of light had been on the front line against evil. The god of light even launched a counterattack against the abyss. If the elemental gods were willing to help him, the abyss might have been directly sealed by him. After all, the four elemental gods were great gods. They had defeated the demon army more than once. At first, the abyss wanted to unify the multiverse, but it was defeated by the elemental army. The four elemental gods worked together to defeat the first batch of the demon army. Later, the demons wanted to focus on winning the blood war first. Soren shuttled through the shadows. In his memory, the city of wealth had never been destroyed, so today's chaos should soon subside. The Temple of Wealth should be about to act. True enough. Not long after Soren left, a golden pillar of light shot up into the sky from the Temple of Wealth. Teams of fully armored golden knights appeared, led by a priest of wealth who was decked out in jewels. The foundation that giant god temple had accumulated over thousands of years was on full display at this moment. Squads of temple knights began to assemble. Several hundred high-ranked knights were equipped with shining golden armor as they rushed in the direction where the demons had appeared. An illusory figure appeared above the Temple of Wealth, seemingly observing the city. That was a Saint Spirit priest. After the legendary priest gave up his physical body, he turned into a holy spirit to protect a place. He had existed for hundreds of years. His heart began to beat faster and faster. Soren could sense that Vivian was in the city, but he couldn't pinpoint her exact location. The gushing blood gave Soren a headache and his temples were throbbing. He didn't know why it was like this. Vaguely he smelled the smell of blood. It wasn't the smell of blood after a massacre, but another smell of blood, a smell of blood that made people feel uneasy. There seemed to be only one kind of magic that could leave a deep impression on Soren's memory of the smell of blood. A silver light broke through the sky. The figure of the silver hand finally appeared in the eyes of the world, but they didn't rush to the place where the demons had appeared. Instead, they flew toward the tower in the distance. There were strange figures approaching from all directions. The Saint Spirit priest seemed to have noticed something. He turned into a solid body in the golden light and then flew toward the tower. Soren's heart was beating faster and faster. The muscles all over his body bulged as if they were exploding. Twisted blue veins emerged like earthworms. Even his face had a dark green color. His heartbeat gradually slowed down. Soren gasped and knelt on one knee on the ground. This strange change was not under his control at all. It seemed that it was because of other forces that caused the change in his body. This change was most likely related to the divinity of fear, because Soren had never encountered such a thing before. He felt that his heartbeat was out of control, and something in his body was about to burst out. Soren's eyes were a little red when he saw something. This was because his pupils were too bloodshot. He saw the traces of vampires. These dark creatures moved on the roof with amazing agility. Their innate dexterity could reach about 20 points. Some other people also appeared. As if telepathically, Soren suddenly noticed a man with a cold face. He rushed over from the direction of the city guards. He seemed to have seen Soren's trace, but he didn't stop at all and moved toward the direction of the silver hand. Something big must have happened over there. Soren gritted his teeth and walked over. His body was gradually out of control. His rapidly beating heart and boiling blood almost made him lose his ability to move. He staggered over. Maybe if he found Vivian he would be able to figure out the reason for all this. Drops of sweat poured out from his body and quickly evaporated. His body temperature was getting higher and higher. His skin was as red as a shrimp. Soren's consciousness gradually became a little blurred, and his vision was almost blurred. His heartbeat would occasionally slow down a little, but it would quickly speed up. He even felt that his heart was about to explode. Rumble. Suddenly there was an explosion in the distance and then the ground shook. Soren? A familiar and exaggerated voice sounded, and then a sneaky short figure escaped from the corner. He glanced at Soren, who was staggering and seemed to want to reach out and support him. But then he retracted his hand as if he had touched a red-hot iron. He muttered, "Oh my God! Why is it so hot? You're about to be roasted." Sauron regained some of his senses. He raised his head and opened his eyes. He saw Aladdin's figure standing in front of him, and behind him was a beautiful woman. But Soren saw two other faces. One was a human face and the other was a face covered with silver scales. The woman's whole body was covered with tiny scales. Only one kind of creature would have such a characteristic. Snake woman? Soren seemed to have remembered something. He said with an unusually hoarse voice as if he hadn't drunk water for a long time, "Snake? Snake woman? Vivian. Where is Vivian?" He suddenly moved as fast as lightning, even faster than his previous speed. In the blink of an eye, he had grabbed the woman's arm. The woman's arm quickly turned red as if it had been put into boiling water. She showed a trace of pain and screamed, "Let me go! Master!" Master went to deal with the son of fear. "It's so hot. Let go." Son of fear? Vivian? Not good. She's in danger. Soren's spirit seemed to have recovered a little. Vivian's figure appeared in his mind, and his will gradually took control of his body. His pupils had enlarged by 2 times, and his body temperature was almost 80 or 90 degrees. His body was almost smoking. He slowly took a deep breath. Unknowingly, Soren's fingers were a little black, and his eyes were densely bloodshot. After taking a few deep breaths, he suddenly jumped up to the height of 3 or 4 floors, and then flew towards the direction of the sound. How is this possible? Only the stunned Aladdin was left. He murmured, "This strength, this speed, this jumping ability. Has Soren become a legendary?" At the top of a tall tower, a man with a devilish face stared at the city that had turned into a sea of fire. His pupils were blood red, and a cruel smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He was like the king of the night as he looked down at the city from above. He was intoxicated. Blood, slaughter, and madness. The stupid clowns have come on stage. I smell the breath of fear spreading. Go crazy. Kill. Fear. Feel despair and fear. You smart idiots. Give me your final performance. Vampire Feast. Legendary spell, a blood-red wave swept out, and the blood of all living creatures within a radius of 500 meters boiled. A trace of blood overflowed from their eyes, ears, mouth, and nose, like a torrent sweeping out. These creatures within the range of the spell turned into dry corpses in the blink of an eye. Countless blood swept out, and then shadows appeared on the corpses. These half-spirit creatures stood up from the corpses, and then escaped into the darkness, gradually disappearing into the night. The whole tower was dyed red with blood as if hell had come to earth. P.S. It seems that the daily mission of Black Pagoda is popular recently. I went to the backstage to look at the results and it's really better than before. No wonder there are more people who are black. Speaking of which, my work is full of sincerity, and the words in the line are all painstaking efforts. Recently, in order to fix the plane, I had to read Relativity to learn more knowledge. Can you guys be a little merciful? In the end, although I can't understand those books at all, I feel that they are very powerful. The Dizzy Stupa. Chapter 184. Soren's speed was getting faster and faster. The surrounding scenery was passing by rapidly. In the eyes of others, Soren was like a shadow passing by. This was not a speed that an ordinary person could achieve, even a legendary profession could not do so. There was a river in the middle of the City of Wealth, about 20 meters wide. After Soren landed, he did not stop at all, nor did he go around to the bridge. Instead, he rushed directly toward the river. He was running on the water. Although it was only a distance of 20 meters, he was really running on the water. Soren's figure came to the street across the river. He stomped his feet and jumped up. There were cracks on the ground and the solid marble floor was shattered. He jumped directly to the height of nearly 5 stories. In the distance he could see a blood-red tower. The sword light of the silver hand was as dazzling as the stars. In front of him was a figure as fast as a ghost. The opponent was not afraid of the power of the Star of Day at all. He was actually on par with the silver hand. A row of data appeared, entered the realm of demigod. You are affected by the effect of Vampire Feast. Triggered the test of Blood Surge. Toughness passed. You have successfully resisted the residual effect of the legendary spell, Blood Feast. You have been affected by the effect of Aura of Fear. Triggered the test of Will. Test of Will passed. You have successfully resisted the effect of aura of fear. It was as if he had passed through an invisible eggshell. Soren suddenly entered an area covered by a force. This feeling was so familiar. When he fought against the Saint of Gods, he had encountered this powerful force more than once. A demigod vampire? How many sons of fear did he kill? Where is Vivian now? Soren's pupils became redder and redder. He gradually approached the battle area. Most of the surrounding buildings had been destroyed. The battle of the legendary level was a complete disaster. The area in front of him was almost turned into ruins. A strange tattoo appeared. It extended from the side of Soren's face all the way to his arms, and then gathered in front of his chest to form a strange vortex. As he got closer and closer to Vivian, his blood surged madly within his body. His heart rate increased by 3 times, and his body temperature rose to over 100 degrees. Soren's spine crackled and his entire body grew a lot taller. His slender fingers became thicker, and his fingernails became sharper with a metallic luster. He couldn't help but let out a painful growl. When he opened his eyes, his pupils had become blood red. This blood red color was gradually spreading, and it seemed like it was going to cover his entire eyeball. Bang! Soren's figure leaped up like a cannonball into the sky. In the blink of an eye, he jumped to a height of tens of meters. His upper body's clothes were broken, revealing a strong and muscular upper body. Only a dark red cloak was still on his body. He was almost 2 meters tall and there was a strange tattoo on his chest. Runes appeared on his thick arms, and his palms looked a little like claws. Even he couldn't adapt to this change, but he didn't have the time to think about it. He could feel Vivian nearby. Soren's body turned into a ray of light, and he leaped from roof to roof. He easily jumped up the 20 to 30 meter tall clock tower, and any obstacles that were difficult to jump over were easy for him. He could even run horizontally across the walls like a gust of wind. Only when he landed on the ground could one see the cracked marble floor. Every time Soren landed on the ground, a spider-like crack would appear on the ground, and it would spread to a distance of 3 to 4 meters. Suddenly, as if by telepathy, Soren found Vivian's position. He saw Vivian, who was a little different from what he remembered. The little girl was wearing a black princess dress, and she had a pair of scarlet eyes. She was looking around vigilantly. She seemed to be fighting. There were strange shadows around her, and Soren could vaguely see something. However, he couldn't catch the traces of her movement across the plain. She was also a legendary class holder. Vivian? Why did she become like this? Was she Vivian or Lillian? Big brother? The little girl opened her mouth wide. She seemed surprised as if she didn't expect Soren to appear. When Soren saw her, she had already noticed Soren. Although Soren's appearance had changed a little, she still recognized him at a glance. But at this moment, a strange figure suddenly appeared. It was a man with a cold face. Soren seemed to have seen this person before. He raised his finger and a dark ray of light shot out, directly attacking Vivian, who was slightly distracted. Energy absorption. Legendary spell? Be careful. Soren's pupils suddenly enlarged. He knew this spell and he had even been tortured by it for a long time. When he heard Vivian call out "Big Brother," Soren had put down all his worries. He gritted his teeth, and his figure disappeared almost instantly. Then he escaped into the shadows. Then the shadow behind Vivian distorted, and Soren's tall body appeared behind her. He suddenly opened his arms and hugged Vivian's petite body, then turned around and blocked the legendary spell with his back. Evade sight. Shadow jump. All this happened in an instant. A man with a cold face suddenly appeared behind Vivian, and then took advantage of the moment when she was slightly distracted to launch a legendary spell. Soren escaped into the shadows in an instant, and then moved across the plain to behind Vivian, not to kill the enemy, but to block the spell with his own body. Big brother. Big brother? Vivian's figure suddenly trembled. At this moment even she didn't have time to react. The only thing she could feel was a figure as heavy as a mountain behind her. Soren opened his arms to protect her petite body in his arms, and then blocked the spell with his back. Crazy negative energy burst out in an instant, and Soren's skin withered at a speed visible to the naked eye. The powerful negative energy eroded his body in the blink of an eye, and transferred the vitality and power in his body to another dimension. In an instant, Soren's pupils were a little lax, his face gradually aged, and his flaxen hair quickly turned into mottled gray. Big brother? No. Vivian let out an extremely sharp cry, and then a wave of air burst out with her as the center. The sharp cry was filled with endless anger and killing intent. With her as the center, the creatures within a 1-kilometer radius died in large numbers, and all the living creatures within a 3-kilometer radius had blood flowing out of their eyes, ears, mouth and nose. Vivian turned around and hugged Soren's fallen body. Her pupils were already scarlet, and a pair of small demonic wings opened up behind her. The pink hair band turned into powder, and her long hair danced in the wind. Big brother. Big brother. Vivian hugged Soren's body with her small arms. A formless negative energy was wreaking havoc in his body, and his body withered at a speed visible to the naked eye, just like a withered plant. Soren's gray hair gradually turned silver, and the frequency of his breathing became slower and slower. The flesh and blood on his body had severely shrunk, and he seemed to have become light as a feather. A series of data appeared crazily, affected by the legendary spell, Energy Drain. Affected by negative energy corrosion. Resistance failed. Permanent loss of 2 profession levels. Affected by negative energy corrosion. Resistance failed. Permanent loss of 2 profession levels. Affected by negative energy corrosion. Resistance failed. Permanent loss of 2 profession levels. The data kept jumping. The first thing that disappeared from Soren's data was 2 Shadow Dancer levels, followed by 2 Rogue levels, and then 2 Wizard levels. The crazy negative energy was wreaking havoc in his body, reducing his life force and corroding his body. Soren lost 8 profession levels and at the same time, lost hundreds of HP. He directly entered a state of near death under the corrosion of negative energy. His heartbeat was getting weaker and weaker and his breathing gradually stopped. But when Vivian transformed into her demonic form with a sharp cry, Soren, who was in a state of near death, suddenly opened his eyes. His pupils turned scarlet red. Then it spread to the whole eyeball and it looked like there was no pupil, just a scarlet eyeball. Soren's body strangely floated, and his whole body made a crackling sound. His originally withered flesh and blood rapidly expanded, and his pale skin became more and more tough. A strange tattoo appeared on his forehead, and his palms turned into sharp claws. Chapter 185. The Sons of Slaughter. This name had not been mentioned for a long time, because what it represented was disaster, a disaster that even evil feared. The predecessor of the Sons of Slaughter was the Divine Son of Slaughter, a direct descendant of the 3 death gods, and also the legendary Son of Slaughter with the strongest combat power. The number of demigods who died in their hands was more than 1 hand, the number of pure-blooded dragons could not even be counted with 10 fingers, and several ancient dragons had also died. As for the other giants, beholders, high-level demons, oracles from another world, high-level vampires, and so on, the total number was probably more than 3 digits. It was simply a massacre. The number of quasi-legendary and legendary professions who died in the hands of the Divine Son of Slaughter was close to 4 digits. They went on a killing spree on the Elven Divine Tree, broke through the Dark Zone, slaughtered the entire Beholder tribe, and even killed some demigods and true gods. As for the various Beholder elders and tyrants, they killed a large number of them, including the Blind God, ancient red dragons, demigod liches, drows and high-level demons. The number of high-level legends who died in the hands of the Divine Son of Slaughter was uncountable. They killed more than 1/3 of the quasi-legendary and legendary creatures that had been accumulated on the continent for thousands of years. But they were still not satisfied. They also went on a killing spree in the abyss, slaughtering a large group of demons. At that time, almost all the dragons on the continent were killed by them. How powerful were they? There were very few records of the Divine Son of Slaughter. The only thing that could be understood was the existence that was now regarded as a grandmaster by the legendary monk, that was, the legendary monk who taught the Dark Moon Force, Flaming Sun Force, and Traceless Steps. He was one of the Divine Sons of Slaughter, and he was not the most powerful one. There was a record of this legendary monk. He was once completely immune to the legendary spell, Time Stop, and his magic resistance had reached more than 90%. When he burst out, he could dismantle the most powerful Diamond Golem with his bare hands. Diamond Golem. Monster level 24, Rune life characteristics, immunity to most spells, physical resistance close to 90%, and immunity to any weapon attack below Transcendent rank 2. From beginning to end, more than 1 million people had died directly or indirectly at the hands of the Divine Son of Massacre. This group of Sons of Slaughter had even killed a dozen of the apostles of the God of Lies and Murder, the Half-Chosen. Everyone, whether good or evil, had suffered heavy losses at their hands. Cities were destroyed by them one after another. The Divine Son of Massacre was a nightmare. Even though so much time had passed, the name of the divine child of massacre still made many people tremble. The son of slaughter was the descendant of the son of slaughter. Back then the son of slaughter was basically all dead. Even if they didn't die, they gradually went into seclusion after the chaos ended. However, their descendants still remained. As time passed, the blood of slaughter in their bodies became thinner and thinner. In the end, they were basically no different from ordinary people. But in this world, there was still the possibility of atavism, so sons of slaughter would appear from time to time. Especially those potential sons of slaughter who had reached the legendary realm or obtained divinity, divine power, or divinity. These sons of slaughter might reawaken the blood of slaughter. The power of divinity strengthened their thinning bloodline, turning them into a weakened version of the son of slaughter. They were also the sons of slaughter, in other people's mouths. Since the god of murder fell into madness and was sealed, the divinity of slaughter and the divinity in the field of reproduction had always been the main force that the evil gods fought for, but in fact, no one had been able to fuse the divinity of slaughter. This also led to the thinning of the bloodline of the son of slaughter, but as long as there was a sudden atavism, it was possible to regain the blessing of divinity and divine power. The sons of slaughter once appeared densely for a period of time during the Arcane Empire, but they rarely appeared in the recent hundreds of years. Divine power transformed. The divinity of fear transformed into the divinity of slaughter. Soren's attributes changed dramatically almost in the blink of an eye, and the biggest change was his main attribute. Name, Soren, son of slaughter. Race, slaughterer, half-demon form. Attributes, strength 20, plus 6, dexterity 24, plus 2, constitution 23, plus 2, intelligence 20, plus 1, wisdom 15, charm 18, plus 2. Special talent, slaughterer form. When you transform into a slaughterer, your attributes will be comprehensively improved. Strength plus 4, dexterity plus 2, constitution plus 2, wisdom plus 2, combat ability is equivalent to a warrior of the same level, and resistance to any abnormal status increases by 10 points. Special talent, slaughtering will. The desire to kill has filled your heart, and you will be immune to most mind control spells, including but not limited to charm, fear, mind control, and so on. Special talent, slaughtering desire. After transforming into a slaughterer, you will be affected by the desire to kill. You will become extremely sensitive to blood, and your perception of anything related to slaughter will be strengthened. But after transforming into a slaughterer, you must kill at least one target to satisfy the desire to kill in your heart. Otherwise, you will enter a state of madness. This desire to kill will gradually increase with the number of transformations you undergo. Soren suddenly opened his eyes. His scarlet pupils were full of killing intent, and the darkness could not block his vision. All living and dead creatures were captured in his vision. He instantly jumped out, and his speed was almost so fast that he almost pulled out a shadow. The legendary curved sword Icing Death appeared in his right hand, and another curved sword appeared in his left hand. Soren's figure suddenly spun, and when he rushed to the front of the enemy, there was a flash of light. The overwhelming sword light shrouded the target, and Soren slashed out 10 times in a second. The high-grade mage's armor shattered like an eggshell. The energy shield on the cold man's body couldn't even hold for half a second. 5 more wounds appeared on his body, and blood suddenly soaked through his clothes. Law command, Awe. Reinforced iron bones. Lesser spell nullification barrier. Greater energy shield. Greater energy damage protection. 5 consecutive spells appeared on the gloomy man's body due to serendipity, and a piece of equipment was suddenly activated. Sauron's next attack was as if he had slashed on steel. Decree, Intimidate, was directly resisted by him, but the greater energy shield that was activated continuously blocked all 15 of his attacks. This was a level 8 spell which was once jokingly called Golden Bell Shield. It was an all-around defensive protection spell. It was directly immune to physical attacks with a strength of less than 50 points. It was difficult for Soren to break through the energy shield while holding 2 curved swords. Occasionally, an attack broke through the shield and hit the opponent, making a metallic sound. Vivian. Soren let out a low roar and turned into the shadow. The surface of his skin was covered with shadow energy, and his whole person looked like a shadow. The little girl's reaction was extremely fast. Just as Soren rushed out, she had already begun to prepare to cast a spell. In an instant, she opened a shield and at the same time, chanted a spell and raised her hand to throw out an energy whip. Kelvin's Whip of Protection. A dark energy whip appeared in Vivian's white little hand. She violently swung it at the cold man in front of her. The moment it touched the opponent, the energy shield had already dissipated. Then the energy whip wrapped around his body, and a dark energy eroded the energy shield. This was a special dispelling spell attack, which could last for a period of time and dispel 3 defensive spells below level 9. Dimensional lock. The cold man clearly felt the danger. The sudden burst of power from Soren and the transformed Vivian almost left him no time to cast a spell. He could only rely on his equipment and the defensive means prepared by accident to protect himself. He decisively wanted to use a teleportation spell, but a faint white light appeared on his body, and then his figure stayed in place. Vivian had already sealed the surrounding space, directly restricting the effect of all teleportation spells. Vivian's casting speed was far faster than his. Spells under 3 seconds were basically instantaneous. The effect of this was very amazing in battle. The gloomy man in front of her had just finished casting a spell, and Vivian had already thrown out an advanced spell that was above level 6 and an intermediate spell that was below level 6. If it wasn't for the fact that her opponent had cast a weak spell nullification barrier that made him immune to level 1 to 3 spells, she could have even thrown out more than 10 low-level spells in one go. Greater disjunction. The little girl's white fingers shot out a light, and the equipment on the cold man's body suddenly turned into powder. He couldn't even activate it in an instant. All that was left on his body was the defensive effect of reinforced iron bones. Soren waved his 2 swords and turned into a shadow. The cold man's body was slashed up and down by him. When reinforced iron bones could no longer withstand Soren's attack, he let out a shrill scream. The legendary curved sword Icing Death directly cut through his waist, almost cutting him in half. A row of data appeared. You have learned something in the battle. As the number of battles increases, you have mastered some of the skills of sword form, waist cut. A golden light flashed across the sky. The figure of the Saint Necromancer appeared around. He frowned and looked at the demigod vampire, then glanced at Soren and the others. In the end, he still focused on the demigod vampire. Obviously, the target was more threatening. The Saint Necromancer cast his spell at an astonishing speed, and soon, a glittering teleportation gate appeared in the sky. Then an angel-like creature in golden armor walked out. Angel from another world. Legendary spell. As a priest of the goddess of wealth, the other party summoned the angel of heaven. Chapter 186. Not good. Soren's pupils shrank slightly. He instantly waved his curved sword and slashed upwards. At the same time, he twisted his body and slashed at the opponent's neck. As blood splattered out, the gloomy man's head was directly chopped off. The headless corpse fell to the ground. Because of the unknown vitality, it moved for a while and then gradually stopped twitching. A row of data quickly appeared. Target killed. Extracting soul energy. You've gained 4500 slaughter EXP. Target is a divine creature. Extracting target's divine power. You've gained 3 divinity. Target has the divine power of fear. Extraction of the divine power of fear failed. Divinity storage failed. Divinity storage failed. You don't have any divinity level or divinity field to store the divine power of fear. Target's divine power of fear has been transferred. The cold man was directly beheaded by Soren, but the divine power in his body did not seem to be stronger than the elven ranger. Soren only got 3 divinity, and at the same time the divine power began to transfer to others. He was a little worried that the divine power would be transferred to the demigod vampire, but it seemed that there was a connection between him and Vivian. The other party's divine power was obviously transferred to Vivian, and then the little girl's figure directly floated up. The power of the 3 demigods was fusing. Vivian's expression seemed to show a trace of pain. Her petite body trembled slightly, and suddenly fell from the sky. The fusion failed? Soren's expression changed slightly. After killing the demigod of fear, the desire to kill in his heart subsided, and he actually felt full. He rushed over to catch Vivian, who fell from the air, and then retreated with her in his arms. The demigod vampire was a demigod, the Silver Hand was the most powerful paladin, and the Saint Cardinal was in the form of a saint, which was also close to the strength of a demigod. This situation was very unfavorable for them because Soren and Vivian had almost no allies. The Silver Hand could attack them and the Saint Cardinal could also attack them. It could be said that the half-vampire couldn't wait to kill them immediately. If he had not been entangled by the Silver Hand. The Oracle from another world was a legendary creature. With the Saint Necromancer joining the battle, the situation of the demigod vampire immediately became a little bad. At the same time, the divine artifact, Morning Star, that the Silver Hand was holding suddenly emitted a strong light. The light seemed to have the power to destroy everything, and it directly purified all the shadow spirits within a 300-meter radius. At the same time, Soren's body, which was illuminated by the strong light, also made a sizzling sound, as if he was being roasted on fire. Sunburst. Powerful spells against evil creatures and undead creatures were sometimes more effective than legendary spells. The demigod vampire's body was charred, but his flesh and blood were recovering at an amazing speed. The legendary spell, Vampiric Feast, was still in effect. This degree of injury could not kill him at all. Demigods were a very special kind of existence. They had divinity and divine power. They might even have divinity, but they didn't have the corresponding divine title. That was to say, demigods had no believers and no corresponding domain of divinity. Divinity was a very important part of the gods. Only with the corresponding divinity could one be regarded as a true god. Therefore, many gods killed each other, and the core power of the competition was the domain of the other party's divinity. This was the source of divine power and the source of improving divinity. Only after obtaining the corresponding divinity could the gods be regarded as having a complete cycle of divine power. The demigod vampire had the divine power of fear and the divinity of fear. It was even possible that he had a weak divinity. But after all, he was not the god of fear, and the divinity of fear was still not on him. Many powerful liches could transform themselves into demigod liches, but very few liches could truly become gods. This was because if they wanted to obtain a divine position, they had to kill other gods and transform their own domain into divine positions. Then, through a slow process, they would have to fuse with the divine positions that they could transform into. At that time, they would be regarded as real gods and could develop their believers on a large scale. Unfortunately, so far there were only a few liches who could become gods. Most of them were used by other gods and given a small number of weak divinities. Demigods could condense divinities by developing believers. However, in this process they would be called false gods, and they were the main targets of many gods. If they wanted to condense divinities that were similar to or similar to other gods, they might be attacked endlessly. Since ancient times, most of the demigods had reached the level of saints and chosen. There were very few who were qualified to be called false gods, unless there were gods who were willing to give up part of their power and transfer some divinities to the demigod. Why is this happening? Soren blocked the strong light of Sunburst with his body and flew out of the domain. Vivian's current situation was a bit similar to the last time. After absorbing the power of the Son of Fear, she directly fainted. Soren was not very clear about the reason for this situation, but the root may be related to the divine power. Under normal circumstances, Vivian should have absorbed the divinity, but now the divinity had been transferred to Soren's body. If Vivian's divinity could not control the divine power, then it would be very difficult to integrate the divine power of fear. But the divinity could not be absorbed by Vivian. Soren knew too well how terrible the will of the Dreadlord was. It was very difficult for him to fight against it. If Vivian absorbed too much of the divinity of fear, her whole body would be disturbed and controlled by this terrible will, especially when Lillian the Witch of Fear might be in her body. There were three kinds of power that could be used as carriers of divine power. The first was divinity, which was why the demigod vampire could be strengthened all the way to become a demigod. The second was divinity, which was a huge container that could accommodate a considerable amount of divine power. The last type was the divine position. The divine position's capacity for divine power was much greater, because as long as one had a divinity, they could develop believers, directly convert divine power into divine spells to give believers, and condense divinities on their own. The divinity was the most critical and core part. That was why the Dreadlord firmly controlled the divinity of fear and only distributed the divine power and divinity to his descendants. The Saint Cardinal obviously noticed Soren's escape. However, his expression was a little hesitant. In the end, he raised his hand and sealed the dimensional space, ready to deal with the demigod vampire in front of him. An ordinary son of fear and a son of slaughter with a thin bloodline were obviously not as important as the demigod vampire. The other party's danger and destructive power could be said to be 10 times more than Soren's. That was why the Silver Hand focused on him. They didn't even try to stop the demons. They just wanted to find him. A demigod vampire. If he was allowed to develop and grow, he could turn into a vampire and then turn into a believer. The consequences would be a disaster. No one wanted to see the birth of a new Dread Lord. Soren quickly left with Vivian in his arms. As time passed, the demonic wings on Vivian's body gradually disappeared, and her scarlet pupils returned to their original appearance. The tattoo on the side of her face also gradually disappeared. Other than the black princess dress on her body, she was almost exactly the same as Soren remembered. At the same time, the changes in Soren's body gradually subsided. The two changed almost at the same time. When Vivian changed back to her original appearance, Soren almost returned to his human appearance. Boom! An unprecedented sense of weakness hit Soren. As the power of the slaughterer faded, the effect of the legendary spell, Energy Drain, began to take effect. His profession level was permanently reduced by 8 levels, and all his slaughter EXP was sealed. Unless he found a high-grade priest to cast Restore on him, he would never be able to level up again. The negative energy corrosion had been permanently left in his body, and this corrosion had almost turned him into a useless person. Damn it! Soren glanced at his own data. His attributes were reduced by 4 points, and the ability of Shadow Jump could no longer be used. His combat power was almost less than half of what it used to be. The only lucky thing was that he had an extra ability to transform into Slaughterer. It seemed that in the case of transforming into a Slaughterer, he could offset the effect of Energy Drain, and temporarily return to his original ability. He quickly left the City of Wealth with Vivian in his arms. His intuition told him that the reason the demigod vampire started such a big massacre was definitely not just to kill 1 or 2 of his kind. He seemed to have other purposes. Hee. The demigod vampire stood up with a strange smile. He was a little weak after taking the sunburst, but his expression was very excited. He glanced at Soren and Vivian, who had already gone far away. He did not seem to be in a hurry to chase after them. The demigod vampire took a step back and looked at the silver hand in front of him, who was also seriously injured. He jumped lightly to the top of the clock tower and then smiled strangely. It's finally about time. Fear is already spreading. This city has provided me with enough power. Then now there's only one last step left. My dear sister. Father has arranged so much for you. He even tried to find a way to wake you up first. But you were incompetent and failed to live up to his expectations. In the end, everything was taken advantage of by me. But our incompetent father probably didn't expect it either. His will is not as strong as imagined. His death is already doomed. And I am the real Dread Lord. But now let me have one more chip to fight against him. The demigod vampire murmured like a neurotic. Suddenly, his pupils turned blood red, and the blood around him surged like a tide. He let out a sharp howl toward the moon in the sky, and a pair of huge bat wings appeared behind him. It was as if some kind of powerful force was brewing. The moon was gradually dyed red, and the red light of the entire City of Wealth went straight to the sky. Countless spilled blood surged, and with the blood-red light, the moon seemed to have turned dark red. At this moment, the whole world seemed to have sensed something. Countless legendary masters looked up at the sky, and the bright moon in the sky had gradually been dyed red. They murmured in a low voice, "Son of the night? Who is it? Who is going to become a god?" Light appeared on the altars one by one. Scattered all over the continent, where the son of the vampire had appeared, groups of people wearing blood-red robes gathered in some dark corners. They had pale faces and sharp fangs at the corners of their mouths. At this moment, they were kneeling devoutly in front of the altars, praying with a voice like madness, "My Lord Reinhardt, you are the master of the vampires. You are the incarnation of fear. You are the most powerful son of the night. My Lord Reinhardt, you are the protector of the vampires. You are the hunter of the night. My Lord Reinhardt, your name will become sacred among the vampires. You will be greater than the ancestors. The fear of mortals will become your divine power. Their fear will make you more powerful. Your kingdom will protect our souls. From today onwards, the souls of the vampires will not return to nothingness. As long as we believe in the great master of the vampires, our souls will be reborn in your kingdom. My Lord Reinhardt, you will raise the kingdom that belongs to you. Become the stars in the sky." Chapter 187. This is the investiture ceremony? Soren stood at the corner of the City of Wealth, looked up at the sky, and his face showed a trace of shock. He didn't expect to see such a familiar scene again so soon, Soren couldn't help but stop and listen carefully. At this time, almost all the legendary professions in the world would feel it, because everything in front of them meant that there would be a new god. It was just unknown whether the demigod vampire would succeed in becoming a god in one go, or first become a false god to increase his power. It was definitely not an easy thing to become a true god. Soren doubted if he had collected enough faith. Vaguely. Soren seemed to hear the prayer through time and space. This was an important process of the investiture ceremony, and also to tell the world that he had the divine title. The prayer was a very important part. If you dared to say a word in the prayer or even inadvertently say a few words, you may be attacked and retaliated by other gods, and the final result would be a disaster and destruction. My Lord Reinhardt, you are the master of the vampires. You are the incarnation of fear. You are the most powerful son of the night. My Lord Reinhardt, you are the protector of the vampires. You are the hunter of the night. My Lord Reinhardt, your name will be sacred among the vampires. You will be greater than the ancestors. The fear of mortals will become your divine power. Their fear will make you stronger. Your kingdom will protect our souls. From today onwards, the souls of vampires will not return to nothingness. As long as we believe in the great master of the vampires, our souls will be reborn in your kingdom. My Lord Reinhardt, you will raise up your kingdom. Become the stars in the sky. The faint sound of prayer became clear. Soren's expression gradually became a little playful, and he said in a low and hoarse voice, "This guy is really bold. Is he not afraid of the other gods joining forces to deal with him?" The first prayer represented the divine name of the demigod vampire. No matter what his name was in the past, from now on he was Reinhardt, and this name was his divine name. From today onwards, anyone who uttered this name would make him feel something in his heart. As his god power and godhead grew stronger and stronger, he would be able to see what happened to anyone who uttered his name for a period of time, even though it would consume a lot of energy. If his godhead grew stronger and stronger, he would even be able to sense and see those who thought of his name in their hearts. This was the power of the gods. God stood above all living things and looked down on this world. His name would become sacred. Therefore, there was a sentence in the prayer, "Your name will become sacred among the vampires." This was a very important sentence, which meant that the followers he developed were mainly among the vampires, and he would not compete with other gods for followers. If Soren dared to change his prayer to "Your name shall become holy among all things," Soren could guarantee that all the shrines in the world would immediately attack his followers and forces. If there were a few wrong words in this prayer, there would be a vague concept, and it would be possible for the gods to fall into eternal damnation. You are the master of the vampires. You are the incarnation of fear. You are the most powerful son of night. This was the prayer in the first row. It represented that Reinhardt's core godhead was the god of vampires, and then his important domains were fear and son of night. Son of Night was a synonym for vampires, and also a generic name for many creatures in the dark domain. This meant that he might extend his godhead to other dark species. However, his core was still vampires and fear. As the son of fear, he was very smart to put vampires first. Otherwise, he would not be able to become a god at all. Because the will of the Dread Lord still existed in the world, the godhead of fear was still in the abyss. You are the protector of the vampires. You are the hunter of the night. The meaning of this sentence was very unusual. It meant that he wanted to become the main god of vampires, and because of the characteristics of vampires, he expanded his domain to the hunting domain. In the future, if he killed the god who had the godhead of hunting, he could use it as a springboard to take over the godhead of hunting. But obviously, this prayer would also make other gods who had the godhead of hunting or the godhead of hunting hostile to him. Unsurprisingly, the believers of the god of hunting would attack him and kill his believers mercilessly. Your name will become sacred among vampires. You will be greater than the ancestors. The fear of mortals will become your divine power. Their fear will make you stronger. Your kingdom will protect our souls. From today on, the souls of vampires will not return to nothingness. As long as we believe in the great master of vampires, our souls will be reborn in your divine kingdom. This was the core of the prayer. It represented the sacred contract after he became a god, as well as the gift to his believers. He would protect the souls of the vampires so that they would not perish. He would be higher than the ancestors and bring fear to the human world. His power came from fear and reverence, not from worship and kindness. This was tantamount to telling the mortals that he was a new evil god. He relied on spreading fear to strengthen his power so that the mortals would revere and believe in him. He would become one of the demons of the evil camp. Vampires would be his core domain and fear would be the source of his power. This was the most primitive prayer. Church of Holy Light. A man with a solemn expression stood up. His gaze passed through space and he said in a majestic voice, "The power of evil has been strengthened. Although the God of light did not respond to our prayers, the power of the holy light will never dissipate. Pass down my order. Gather the clergymen. Find that false god and his vampire followers. Purify them." Night Temple. A female priest with a wicked face looked at the sky and whispered, "Has a false god been born? As the son of the night, he did not show respect and surrender to the great lady of the night. He is indeed a vampire who does not know the immensity of heaven and earth. Pay attention to them and wait for the lady of the night's oracle." Scenes after scenes happened. However, the biggest reaction was the believers of the Dread Lord. Somewhere in a dark basement, a blue flame roared and roared, "Shameless thief! He stole the divine power of our Lord. Damn thief! Our Lord's power has declined. He took away part of the realm of fear. You bunch of trash! Hurry and find the Witch of Fear Lillian. Only she can stop this thief. The power of fear cannot be dispersed. Send out all the apostles of fear. Immediately carry out a great purge of all the vampires. We have to kill as many of his potential believers as possible." Investiture was just the beginning. When the investiture ceremony was completed, a greater massacre was also brewing. A large number of vampires might gather around the only vampire god, and other believers of the god would also attack them. This was an extremely tragic process. It might last for hundreds of years if nothing shocking suddenly interfered with them. This battle would last until one side was destroyed or retreated. Chapter 188. False God. The roar of the Saint Necromancer came from afar, followed by a violent explosion. The other party even had plans to ignore the City of Wealth and wanted to directly destroy the demigod vampire in front of him. Apotheosis was actually a behavior that was very easy to be rejected, especially if the fame of the apotheosized person had not spread throughout the multiverse. The legendary point that Soren got was one of the core elements of apotheosis. The higher the legendary point, the smaller the backlash after apotheosis, because your reputation had already spread throughout the world. So for you to suddenly apotheosis, the sense of rejection in other people's hearts would be much smaller. If your name was heard by even the gods and left a deep impression in the abyss, then when you decided to apotheosis, others would take it for granted. Yes, I have heard this name more than once. This name already has such prestige, this name has spread all over the world. He has defeated so many enemies, he has been to so many places, the mortal world is almost at the peak for him. So if such a person does an apotheosis, what else can he do? The legendary point may directly help the apotheosized person become a true god, because your existence has been known by too many people. When you decide to apotheosis, those who respect you will provide you with power, those who love you will also provide you with power. When they remember your name and your existence, the first batch of faith will appear. Maybe this is not pure enough, but the power of faith is in it. Those who are afraid of you will tremble when they hear your name when you apotheosis. Those who love you will cheer when they hear your name when you apotheosis. This is a kind of power. And it is a kind of power that is comparable to a fanatic, although it will only be effective at the moment of apotheosis. Unfortunately, the legendary point is not so easy to get. Soren now only has 10 legendary points. According to the normal procedure, the legendary point needs to be at least 200 points. Let your name resound throughout the abyss, spread throughout the dark realm, and even let the gods remember your name. Only then can you really reach the standard of apotheosis. Whether it is a bad name or a good name, you have to at least let the world know that you are qualified to be apotheosis. The demigod vampire was undoubtedly the kind of trickster. He relied on spreading fear to gather power, and then relied on the divinity and divine power of the Dread Lord to maintain faith. Therefore he could only be regarded as a false god, estimated to have reached the level of a saint at most. Soren was still unable to determine if the other party had any other tricks up their sleeves, but based on the current situation he was afraid that the days ahead of him would be very difficult. This was because after he became a god, the number of enemies suddenly increased dramatically. Any god who became a god without a golden thigh or a strong background would have a period of extremely tragic fighting. Even when the goddess of agriculture was apotheosized, backed by Mother Earth and the Lord of Light, who were the two most powerful gods in the multiverse, there were still gods looking for trouble with her. They wanted to fight for the priesthood of agriculture, plants, nature, and so on. One could imagine the difficulty of ascending to godhood and the challenges one had to face after ascending to godhood. The new god was very weak, but killing the new god would make it possible for him to inherit the new god's priesthood. If the demigod vampire was killed, the core priesthood of the god of vampires may be inherited by others, but there were certain conditions. At the same time, the realm of fear was a realm that could be strengthened by almost any god. If that god did not have the realm of fear, he could get the divinity of fear and become a springboard for further mastery of the priesthood of fear. If he originally had the realm of fear, he could use it to improve his power and even extend it to other realms of fear. Even a good god could rely on the realm of fear and the divinity of fear to turn it into a part of courage, such as fearless fear and overcome fear. It was just that the transformation of the realm took a relatively long time. The power of the gods needed a springboard, and there were many extension realms that could be used, so the competition for the priesthood was very fierce. Soren went far away from the City of Wealth. He had to avoid this kind of saint-level battle. The Saint Cardinal was a weakened version of the saint form, and the demigod vampire was also a standard saint form after being apotheosized. The Silver Hand belonged to the high-grade legends, and it was better for him to not get involved in this level of battle. The most important thing now was Vivian. Although Vivian's breathing was stable, she had not woken up, which was definitely not a good idea. If she really couldn't control too much divine power, then Soren had to help her strengthen her divinity or fuse with a piece of shard of divinity. The divinity of fear was absolutely not to be absorbed. Because the Dreadlord's interference with the demigod vampire was too strong, the demigod vampire seemed to have defeated the will of the Dreadlord, but he was probably deeply affected. A row of data appeared: Apotheosis Ceremony, God of Vampires, Legendary Battle. New Moon Era 1675, late October. In the City of Wealth, the demigod vampire Reinhardt conspired to be apotheosized, spreading fear and killing in the city. The Silver Hand came to stop him but failed. The life priest of the goddess of wealth joined the battle. In this serious legendary event, you transformed into a slaughterer and killed another son of fear. The news about the appearance of the son of slaughter will gradually spread, and many existences will be shocked by this name. A group of special people will also spread your existence further and further. Legend level +6. This was the most legend level that Soren had ever received. Even he was a little surprised by this value because even if he killed a pure-blooded white dragon, he might not be able to get 6 legend level. In the Battle of Whiterun he only got 1 legend level. In the hunting ceremony he destroyed the hunter's sacrifice ceremony and killed a son of fear, but he only got 3 legend level. But now he got twice as much legend level as he did in the hunting ceremony. Some nobles of the kingdom might not have such fame. Soren held Vivian and walked further and further away. Although his strength had decreased a lot, he was not too worried because he could just turn into a killer again. He was most concerned about Vivian now. It was obviously impossible to find Gloria because they had been involved in the legendary battle. The demigod vampire had become a false god, and his strength had increased a lot. It was very likely that he would attract a large number of vampire believers. At that time, his power would be unprecedentedly huge, and the other sons of fear would become very dangerous. Even if there were many churches suppressing him, there would be differences in distance, time, and position, and the other gods would be sleeping. It was impossible to eliminate a false god in a short time. If he could survive until the time of troubles, then there would be fewer people who would have time to care about a god of vampires. Soren was looking for the future. In fact, he already had one of the plans, but it was not until he could turn into a killer that he had the possibility to implement the plan. He planned to take Vivian overseas. Originally, Soren planned to level up all the way to the legendary realm, and then wait for the opportunity to become a saint, but now the mainland was becoming more and more unsafe. Their enemies were also increasing. He was going to take Vivian overseas. On the one hand he could slightly avoid the power of the demigod vampire, and on the other hand there were many important opportunities overseas. Due to the small population overseas and the special geographical environment, ferocious beasts and poisonous insects were rampant, and the entire civilization was relatively barbaric. Therefore, many weaker gods and false gods were active there. Some of them could not even be considered gods, but were only monsters close to demigods. Of course, monsters were Soren's personal opinion, and they were mainly called spirits. The product of totem belief. There were many primitive tribes scattered overseas, and many of them were based on totem belief. There were many demigod spirits in the tribes. They were still far away from the gods, but their strength was above the legendary realm. This place was originally gradually explored after the Avatar crisis, but now Soren undoubtedly had the ability to challenge it. Many of these spirits were below the demigod level. They had divinity but no divinity and divine power. Some of the more powerful ones were false gods. They may only have tens of thousands of believers, but they had multiplied and passed down for thousands of years. Many creatures were originally spirits because of totem worship for too long, and gradually a trace of divinity appeared. That place was behind the tropical rainforest, near the Amazons. Because the Storm Lord did not care about these weak false gods, there was no church to attack them. The Storm Lord was too powerful. These false gods might not be qualified to jump in front of him even if they had developed for 10,000 years. Those places were very wild and primitive. Occasionally, legendary wizards would travel there, but other professions rarely went there. Because divinity was a very powerful force, it could be compared to nuclear fuel. It was useless to add it to a car engine like gasoline. Soren and Vivian could transform divinity, but it was almost difficult for other legendary professions. Even the demigod might not succeed, and it would take a long time to succeed. If one's strength did not reach a certain level, it was impossible to understand what divinity was. Even legendary wizards had to study it for a long time. And it had to be a relatively powerful research target, otherwise, there was no way to extract the divinity if it was too weak. In the records, there were legendary wizards who stripped the divinity from the demigod of massacre, and even took away the power of the demigod of massacre. As for the other reason Soren planned to go overseas, there were probably very few top priests on the continent who were willing to remove the legendary spell, Energy Drain, for him, and they might even attack him. But overseas was the territory of many evil gods, and those legendary priests who served them only cared about money. For example, in the camp of the Storm Lord, he was the standard chaotic evil. These places had unique rules, and they were very tolerant of people from the evil camp. As long as you could afford it, they did not care if you were good or evil. P.S. The overall camp on the continent is neutral, and the overall camp in the overseas area is neutral. Chapter 189. A fishy sea breeze blew in his face. Soren walked across the deck with the petite Vivian in his arms. Beside him were other people who were slightly surprised because a young man holding a sleeping little girl was undoubtedly very eye-catching. The scarlet cloak was quite eye-catching. Two people with unkind faces looked at each other and seemed to be plotting something. But then a strong man came over, reached out and patted them on the shoulder and said in a cold voice, "Don't think about them. A man dares to bring a little girl here like this. He's not someone you guys can deal with." This was Port Tylon, a transit station to the Soros Islands. From time to time, there were voices of discussion behind them. Some were guessing the identity of Soren, and some were talking about the news from the City of Wealth. It was said that a very serious event had happened there. 1/3 of the City of Wealth had been destroyed, and at least thousands of people had died. Many ships that had originally planned to go to the City of Wealth had docked at other ports, ready to leave after unloading their goods. Because of the legend of an evil false god, many churches were now hostile to them. The City of Wealth was now a place of dispute. The ascension of the demigod vampire had undoubtedly attracted most of the attention. Whether it was the local churches that hated the Son of Fear, the believers of fear who were secretly manipulating them, or the sons of fear scattered around the world, almost all eyes were attracted to him. The churches wanted to defeat him, the believers of fear wanted to regain their power, and the other sons of fear, whether to protect themselves or to become stronger, the demigod vampire was a hurdle that they could not get around. It was even possible that other sons of fear would be forced to unite, because he was too strong. After the demigod vampire became a false god, he was in the form of a saint, and he could almost easily suppress any son of fear. The other party had drawn a lot of hatred. Soren was sure that before the demigod vampire fell, he and Vivian would be very safe. In fact, he even hoped that the demigod vampire could hold on for a while, because as long as he did not fall, no one would be bored enough to pay attention to the little Vivian and the inconspicuous son of slaughter. Even the believers of fear did not have the energy to pay attention to them, because as long as the demigod vampire existed, the power of the Lord of Fear would decline. He was stealing the divine power and priesthood of the Lord of Fear, because he also had the fear domain. Soren would be an idiot if he didn't find a chance to grow stronger now that the other party's aggro was almost all gone. Port Tylon. Soren carried Vivian down the merchant ship. They couldn't depart from the inland port to the outer islands because it was easy to encounter some annoying creatures. Port Tylon was a transit station. There were big ships going to the tropical rainforest. After passing through the territory of the Amazons, it was a primitive and wild land. There were many valiant aborigines there, and cannibal tribes were scattered all around. Other than the crazy pioneers, not many people went there. Especially after some of the gold mines had been mined out, there were even fewer pioneers heading to the outer islands. In fact, there were still many gold mines. Soren didn't know much, but he did know that there was a treasure island in the outer islands. This place was only discovered many years later. Currently, it was controlled by a group of powerful cannibal tribes. Perhaps due to geographical reasons, the mineral resources in the outer islands were more densely distributed and easier to mine. However, there were too many aborigines scattered in these places. Among them, there were totem spirits that they believed in. Even a legendary wizard would have difficulty dealing with a large tribe. Moreover, legendary professions didn't need to make a fortune from this, so the minerals in the outer islands were probably only about 1/10 of them. This was how the maritime trade developed. Although the level of civilization of the Aborigines was not high, there was a lot of foreign trade. Even if a large ship of food was brought over, it could be sold at more than 3 times the price. And Soren also remembered that the exchange ratio of gold and silver on the mainland was 10:1. In many places in the outer islands, the ratio of gold and silver was 6:1. Because the proportion of gold was larger, the silver coins in the outer islands were far more valuable than on the mainland. Just the exchange of gold and silver was a large profit. Therefore, there were very developed trade routes and a large number of pirate groups. One of the major forces was the Amazons. Soren set foot on the land of Port Tylon with the sleeping Vivian in his arms. It was an island about 30 kilometers in diameter. There was a small town inside, which had been controlled by other forces for many years. He vaguely heard crying and begging for mercy coming from the front. There were sturdy sailors nearby who were looking at them with a smile. Soren was not in the mood to see what was going on. However, when he walked over, he still saw a young man whose fingers had been chopped off and 3 bloody fingers on the ground. This was a thief. Here, stealing was not a crime if it was not discovered. But if it was discovered, the owner could deal with the thief himself. Even if he used lynching, no guards would care. There were guards wearing half-body armor next to him, but they just looked at him with cold eyes. There were crowds of onlookers around and some of his companions who didn't look good. They didn't intend to help. Because if you were caught stealing here, you would have to admit defeat. You would have to cut off your fingers or even your palm. However, it was not allowed to kill a thief casually. If you used lynching to kill a thief, the guards had the right to fine you. You're lucky today. A burly man with a valiant face kicked the young man who was rolling on the ground and screaming miserably. He then spat out a mouthful of saliva, weighed his money pouch and said in a deep voice, "If you want to get rich, go find One-Eyed Jack. Rely on your own strength to earn money on the edge of the blade. Next time you may not be so lucky. If it was someone else, your arm would have been cut off today." The surrounding sailors only looked on with smiles on their faces as if they were watching a good show. No one would sympathize with them. Soren didn't even look over there and walked over with an indifferent expression. Port Tylon was a little noisy. There were noises everywhere. During the day there were prostitutes standing on the street to solicit customers. Sometimes they would go directly into the alley to start the prostitution business. The ground here was quite dirty, and there was a strong fishy smell. The people here all had bad breath because there were many sailors here, and at the same time there were also pirates. No matter if it was overall or in all aspects, it was much more chaotic than the mainland. There were many taverns in Port Tylon. There was one next to the inn that Soren found. There were sounds of fighting coming from inside. Occasionally there were guards patrolling, but they didn't seem to care. Nearby there were big men with their arms crossed in front of their chests. From time to time, there were roars of laughter, shouting obscenities like kicking his balls. The tavern owner wiped the table in front of the bar calmly. Occasionally he would look up. Perhaps he had seen too much, so his expression didn't change. The winner of the tavern fight was another group of people, led by a strong and muscular woman. She laughed and lifted a man, then threw him out of the tavern with a shoulder throw. At this time the owner looked up and gave a look to the thug next to him. Here, no matter who started first, no matter who was right or wrong, as long as something was broken, the tables and chairs in the tavern would be compensated by the person who lost. Unless it was an unreasonable thing or a malicious fight that was too obvious, the tavern owner and the thugs would not interfere. It was normal to fight because of a quarrel here. As long as no one died, everyone would just watch the fun. The guards passing by were not interested in interfering. The thug threw the guy who lost out and took out the money bag. The other people who were watching the fun quickly quieted down. However, there were quite a few people who looked at the strong and muscular woman with interest. Many of them even wanted to buy her a drink. This was a female warrior of the Amazon. This kind of woman was full of wildness and was more attractive to them than many women. The guy who was knocked out was quickly robbed by the second wave of looting. Some sneaky young men stripped him of all his valuables, leaving only a thin pair of underwear. Then he was thrown into the alley and almost no one cared about him anymore. Soren was quite used to this place. The chaos in front of him was nothing at all. If there was a murder in the Underdark, as long as no one saw it and no clues were left, it was not a murder. Almost no one would care about it. The chaos here was just child's play. At least everyone was quite restrained and would not easily kill people. The managers here did not want too many deaths. There were a large number of criminals in Port Tylon. As long as they were not wanted, recognized, and reported, they were legal civilians. So there were a lot of pirates here. This was a port second only to the City of Wealth for selling stolen goods. Because of the incident in the City of Wealth, this place was much more prosperous than before. Soren looked up at the sky. Port Tylon had a sea temple, which was a temple to serve the sea goddess. There were many such temples in the coastal areas. Pirates, villains, sea creatures, and so on. They mainly believed in the Lord of Storms and the sea goddess. The relationship between these two gods was quite complicated. They were both chaotic and evil, but they were full of competition between each other. From time to time they would fight. These two gods fought once hundreds of years ago, so their relationship was relatively cold recently. However, the possibility of them hooking up again was not ruled out. The hotel Soren found was very expensive. It cost 15 Kindler a night, but it was also very safe because there were two resolute female warriors standing at the door. This was a hotel owned by the Amazons as a post station for their stronghold. No one dared to make trouble here, even the guards did not dare to check. These women were barbaric and unreasonable. Whether it was a guest or a guard, as long as they dared to break the rules here, they were their enemies. There was a large basement under the hotel. Soren could feel it when he walked on the floor. There were also traces of magic traps nearby. There were at least 3 high-grade professions here. He entered the room quietly and then put the sleeping Vivian on the bed. Soren was going to the sea temple to try his luck. If the other party was willing to remove the energy absorption spell for him, it would not be a problem even if he had to pay a little more. The effect of the energy drain spell on his body was too unbearable. The hotel was very safe. People who had been overseas knew how strong the Amazons were. Among the 3 pirate kings on the Soros Islands, the Amazons accounted for half of them. These women were very favored by the Storm Lord, and the sea goddess also liked these fierce female warriors. When Soren walked out of the door, a woman came up the stairs from the corner. It seemed that she had just come out of the basement. It was a wild woman, playing with a strange dagger in her hand. It seemed that it was not a weapon but a torture instrument. The other party was stained with a lot of blood and a little bit of flesh, but it was all someone else's. After seeing Soren, she said calmly, "Guest? Don't worry. I just dealt with a guy who did not follow the rules." She seemed to notice Soren's appearance and the power contained in his thin body. This made her eyes light up slightly. She stuck out her tongue and licked her lips. She said as if she was teasing him, "Do you need some pleasant service? We have the most difficult to tame horses here. Maybe with your appearance, they will be happy to provide service for free. Of course, you have to be able to satisfy them. Otherwise they will throw you out of the bed." Speaking of this, she smiled inexplicably and moved her eyes to Soren's lower body. Soren seemed to be a little silent. Sure enough, the Amazons were as fierce as ever. Chapter 190. On the noisy street. Soren walked forward with his whole body covered in a cloak. He did not have a good impression of Amazonian women, especially their attitude of treating men as mating tools. There were 2 kinds of females with the worst attitudes in the world. The first was the drows and the second was the Amazonian women. If you didn't have eyes and spent money to seek pleasure from them, you would eventually find that you were the one being played. Moreover, if you didn't have enough fighting power, they would look at you with a look of pity and contempt. Soren's combat power was beyond doubt. He could even deal with the most depraved and evil drows in the Underdark. Naturally, he would not be at a disadvantage against these Amazonian female warriors. However, these women were too arrogant. If your strength was not as high as theirs, they could ride on you for most of the night. In the end, you would feel that it was not you who was F*king her, but she who was F*king you. Please forgive Soren for being too vulgar, but in fact, these women were so difficult to deal with. It was best to keep a distance from them. Moreover, Amazonian women were known for being ruthless. One moment they would blend with you, and the next moment, as long as there was a conflict of interest, they would kill you in the next moment. The view of ordinary women should never be used on them. The night in Port Tylon was not peaceful. Soren shuttled through the crowd and occasionally saw some very dangerous people. These were the guys who were involved in the smuggling trade. They had a variety of goods, including human species. The indigenous people were part of the smuggling trade. Women and children were sold to the slave black market, and men could be sent to work in the mines. The indigenous people of the Soros Islands had never stopped fighting with them. The hustle and bustle in the tavern lasted until dawn. Every day there would be unlucky fellows who would be robbed or lose their lives here. It was quieter near the temple. People's fear of the evil gods was more real than their love for the good gods. No one dared to make trouble near the temple of the sea goddess, unless they were tired of living. On the contrary, before they passed by the sea temple, they would offer a prayer to the sea goddess to protect them from disaster. The goddess of ocean was a very vengeful god. As long as you dared not to make a sacrifice this year, she would dare to set off a huge wave and send sea monsters to kill a fleet next year. If the anger in her heart was not appeased, this disaster would last for a long time. Even the pirates had to make a nominal sacrifice every year, holding a relatively large deity offering ceremony. There were almost no guards in front of the temple. However, the sea temple was connected to the underground sea. The temple was surrounded by a bottomless pool. There were sea monsters with a monster level of 16 or so. If they dared to mess around, there would be tentacles that would pull them into the water. Many of the corpses produced in Port Tylon every year were fed to these monsters through the sewers. Occasionally, giant sharks could be seen. In the center was a statue of a goddess. It was a statue of a goddess that looked quite evil. Her hair was like seaweed and there were dark tattoos on her face. Her arms were white and slender, but there were scales on her abdomen. Her legs were very slender and powerful. She was wearing a light blue dress like seaweed. In her hand was the artifact, Drowned Death, which was a very powerful trident. At the feet of the sea goddess was a giant great white shark. She loved the shark people in the sea species. These monsters were her most devout servants. Soren bowed slightly to the guard in front of the temple. After stating his purpose, he was soon taken into the temple. There was a strange blue light in the temple. The walls were carved with the waves of the sea. Under the light, it was as beautiful as the flowing sea. The guard quickly left the hall. Soren did not dare to move around. He stayed quietly in place because the temple was a very dangerous place. There were faint traces of moisture on the ground. Soren saw a sea flowing through the temple, and then penetrating into the ground from the corner of the temple. Then there was a faint fishy smell. It was the smell of sea creatures. Human. A somewhat evil magnetic voice sounded. A female creature with seaweed hair, light blue skin, and 4 arms appeared at the back of the temple. Her lower body was a bit like the tail of a huge sea snake. She frowned and came to the front of the temple. She stared at Soren with cold eyes and said slowly, "The guard said that you want to seek help from the great sea goddess?" Naga siren. One of the ancient sea creatures. It had some kind of blood relationship with the snake demons? Yes. Soren humbly lowered his head to express his awe. He said in a deep voice, "I have been hurt by some terrible spells. I want to ask the priest of the sea goddess to help me eliminate the evil power in my body." There was a faint light in the eyes of the Naga siren. After looking at Soren, she slowly said, "Negative energy? Energy absorption damage? Is it a vampire? Or a dark species? Or other spells?" Energy absorption damage was not only a legendary spell. High-grade vampires could also use negative energy to erode the enemy. It's energy absorption. Soren did not hide anything. He said in a deep voice, "I have been hit by energy absorption. My power has been sealed. The negative energy is still in my body." The Naga siren showed a hint of surprise and said slowly, "Energy absorption? Human. It seems that your strength is not bad." Soren was not dead after being hit by a legendary spell. Naturally, his strength was not bad. Moreover, he did not look very weak. This meant that even if he was hit by energy absorption, he still retained the strength of a second-grade warrior. The Naga siren was silent for a moment. The temple would provide services to others, but they had to pay a price. The most common price was to offer money. All temples needed a lot of money to maintain. The sea goddess did not have so many concerns. Even if the evil pirates were incomparably evil, her priests would also provide help. However, this kind of help depended on the degree. A legendary spell like energy absorption must be cast with a high-level restoration spell. This was not a small price for the priests. They might even be weak for a while. Her eyes flashed a ray of light and she said in a low voice, "Human. The sea goddess is willing to help anyone, but you have to pay the corresponding price." Soren nodded gently, then took out a large number of kindler and a large number of gems. In this situation he had to show his sincerity first. Soren got a lot of things in the City of Wealth. The things he took out now were probably worth close to 8,000 kindler. In order to let the other party cast a high-level restoration spell, he had to pay a lot of money. Moreover, the priests of evil gods were naturally more expensive than the priests of good gods. If they were not believers or had other contributions, they might have to pay more than 50% more wealth. Not enough. The Naga siren shook her head gently. Her more than 2 meters tall body swam in front of Soren. A faint blue light appeared in her eyes. She slowly said, "The power of this spell not only hurt your body, but also weakened your soul. This little contribution can't repair the soul." Weak soul. Soren seemed to think of something. After a moment of silence, he said in a deep voice, "My respect for the sea goddess is unquestionable. How much do I have to pay to ask your excellency to remove the negative energy in my body? Just give me a little time, and I will find a way to get enough wealth to contribute." The Naga siren seemed to be thinking. The temple had its rules and they were not providing help without a bottom line. If it was just a normal healing spell she would not have to do it. However, such high-level spells could not be used indiscriminately because it would consume the divine power gathered by the temple. The high-level restoration spell could save a dying person. Missing arms and legs could be regrown. Even if there was only a head, as long as the person was not dead, they could be saved. The cost of this kind of spell was naturally high, and legendary priests would use it carefully. Human. A strange light appeared in the eyes of the Naga siren, and then her expression became a little cruel. She slowly said, "If you want to get the help of the goddess, you must contribute to the goddess. I can help you remove the spell on your body, but you must do something for the goddess." Soren's heart skipped a beat, but he slowly said, "What is it?" The sea goddess was an evil god. This kind of task was definitely not a good thing. However, Soren did not hesitate. The Naga siren looked at him. After a moment, there was a trace of anger and cruelty on her face. She said in a deep voice, "Recently, a group of people have left the faith of the sea goddess. They no longer revere the sea goddess. This group of people have offered the sacrifice ceremony that originally belonged to the sea goddess to the Storm Lord. This group of people must be punished. They must pay the price of betraying the sea goddess." The voice of the Naga siren was like a rumbling thunder. She said with an angry expression, "I want you to kill them. Kill all of them. Leave no one alive. This group of sad mortals will remember the majesty and anger of the sea goddess. They will understand the price of betraying the sea goddess. Bring me the head of their leader. Not only do you not have to pay any wealth, but you can also get the reward of the sea goddess." Human. Do you agree? Although it's dangerous, it's worth it, right? You should have the strength to deal with those guys. I will also help you. Don't try to deceive me and don't try to deceive the sea goddess. If you violate the contract, the sea goddess' anger will come to you. Just because she no longer believed in the sea goddess, she had to kill her former believers? This was indeed the sea goddess style. Although it was possible to offend the Storm Church, Soren nodded without hesitation and said in a deep voice, "Yes. I'll kill them all." The Naga siren showed a cruel smile and slowly said, "Very good. Follow me to the back of the temple. I will help you remove the spell on your body and then restore your weak soul. Remember what you promised. This is the contract with the sea goddess." Chapter 191. The other party was using him as a knife. Soren had guessed this from the beginning, but there was no free lunch in the world and there were not many choices for him. To put it even more harshly, being used proved that you had value. If you didn't even have value, the other party probably wouldn't even give you such a chance. Although the relationship between the sea goddess and the Storm Lord was very competitive, she would never directly attack the followers of the Storm Lord. Therefore, the Sea Temple would not directly attack the target they wanted to kill. This could lead to a disaster. No one would want to expand the incident into a war between the two temples, or further escalate into a war between the two gods. The Naga Siren priests followed the teachings of the sea goddess and punished the followers who betrayed their faith. This was a very important test. If she ignored it, the sea goddess might even punish her and deprive her of her power. But if she went too far and started a war between the Sea Temple and the Storm Temple, then the sea goddess might be angry and even punish her and deprive her of her power. This was where the high-grade evil priests were in trouble. Sometimes they even had to pray for the will of the gods because the consequences would be more serious if they made a wrong decision. Behind the sea temple, Soren entered the blue sea naked. It was a clear pool and the sea water came out of nowhere. The holy water provided by the sea temple was the taste of the sea water. The pool in front of him might be the place where the holy water was transformed. The cold sea water submerged his chest. Soren felt a warmth after the initial cold. It felt like he was soaking in amniotic fluid, like an embryo returning to the mother's body. It seemed that the speculation of the outside world was not wrong. The sea goddess really touched the divinity of life, and even extended the doctrine that life was originally born from the sea. However, life at least needed to be in the neutral camp. Soren had never heard of a god of life in the chaotic camp. It seemed that if the sea goddess wanted to further expand the domain of life, she must forcibly restrict her behavior and at least shift her camp to the neutral evil position. Only then could she become the god of life that evil creatures believed in. The Storm Lord and the Sea Goddess were very interesting. The relationship between these two gods was intense and they were once very close. Later they also fought. Even after the Goddess of Ocean got involved in the domain of life, the Lord of Storms also got involved in the domain of life. Because the Lord of Storms had mastered the divine domain of thunder and lightning, he actually accepted one of the research materials of the Arcane Empire and developed it into the doctrine that the most primitive life was born in the lightning storm. He also wanted to extend a trace of the domain of life with this. However, it seemed like he had failed. Actually, it was quite normal when one thought about it. The gods of life in the past were all goddesses. Even if they were not beautiful, they were full of motherly aura. Who would be willing to accept a rough, muscular, crazy and violent man as a god of life? But it seemed that the Storm Lord had not given up. This was because he seemed to have given up part of his priesthood in the past few hundred years and cultivated one of his daughters. As the second god of the Storm realm, she was the daughter of Storm, who had many believers among the Amazon female warriors. She was mainly known as the Goddess of Storm to outsiders. The priesthood she was in charge of included women, life and children, but it was limited to tropical rainforest areas. Perhaps this was also the reason why the relationship between the Storm Lord and the Goddess of Ocean had deteriorated further, because the Goddess of Ocean had mastered the domain of life in the ocean. The struggle would not happen for no reason. Even the existence of chaos and evil would not be bored enough to fight with a dangerous enemy. There must be a deeper meaning and conflict of interest. Both the Storm Lord and the Goddess of Ocean wanted to go further. They were already great divine powers, and the possibility of going further was very low, unless they suddenly mastered some extremely powerful domain of priesthood. Therefore, after a long period of silence, the two gods both embarked on the same path, which was to create their own god system. The Lord of Storm intended to create the Storm god system, while the Goddess of Ocean intended to expand the Ocean god system. In this way they were all at the level of the great divine powers, and they were already qualified to try to reach the level of greater divine power. As a result, the two gods who were once close to each other almost became enemies. A little bit of blue light emerged, followed by the low singing voice of the Naga siren. It was very difficult to cast high-level magic, especially healing magic, which required a certain price. In order to expel the negative energy erosion in Soren's body and repair his weak soul at the same time, she had to cast a high-level restoration spell. Even if the king asked to cast this spell, it was not so easy. In order to completely heal Soren's injuries, the Naga Siren priest had to draw on the divine power that had been accumulated in the temple for a long time. Otherwise, she would have to replace Soren's life with her own life force. This was the reason why legendary priests could only live for 200 or 300 years at most. The power of a priest came from the divine power, and in the end they still had to return to the kingdom of the gods. The warm sea water washed the whole body. Soren's skin began to shed as if it had been purified from head to toe. Traces of black substance seeped out of his pores. This was just the beginning. Under the gentle divine power of the sea, all the hidden injuries on Soren's body were healed. The scars on his back and chest gradually disappeared. Any diseases, injuries, and hidden injuries on his body were completely healed. Soren's body was being purified, approaching his peak state of 100%. This effect was even more exaggerated than the bloodline purification ceremony. The bloodline purification ceremony only strengthened the life force and stimulated the latent ability, while the high-level restoration spell restored the person to their current peak state. Soren's naked body stood up in the sea. His skin had become white and tough, and all the injuries had been completely healed. The internal organs that had been injured were as if they had been reborn, and all the hidden injuries had completely disappeared. At the same time, there seemed to be a trace of satisfaction in the depths of his heart. There was a feeling of being tired for a long time and finally having a good rest. A row of data appeared. You have been affected by the effect of greater restoration. All your injuries have been healed. The effect of energy drain has been removed. The effect of weakened soul has been removed. The recovery of the body has been completed. The effect of weakened soul has been removed. You have recovered the legendary skill, Omnipotent Hands. Omnipotent Hands, legendary skill. The legendary thief has extremely dexterous hands. When performing any profession-related test, an additional +5 test bonus will be obtained. At the same time, when using any weapon in battle, the thief will automatically master the weapon ability above the level of proficiency. In theory, the Omnipotent Hands can also use any item. Whether it is the divine weapon of the gods or some weapons and equipment with specific restrictions, the Omnipotent Hands can easily use them. There was a trace of tiredness on the face of the Naga Siren priest. She stared coldly at Soren, who stood up from the pool. Her expression was ruthless and cold. She slowly said, "Human, remember what you promised. Otherwise, the goddess of ocean will also take back everything that is given to you today." Soren stopped. He looked at his naked body and smiled. He then bowed slightly to show respect and said, "I will remember the contract I promised the sea goddess. Those who betray her faith will be punished." Merciless punishment. If those who betrayed their faith were not punished, the foundation of the sea goddess believers would be affected. This was a very serious matter. So even if the sea temple could not directly attack the Storm Lord, as the priests of the sea goddess, they had to find a way to kill those who betrayed their faith. Soren was the killer they needed. Even if anyone could guess that the Sea Temple was behind this, as long as the people of the Sea Temple did not directly attack, the priests of the Storm Lord could not turn against them. There was a trace of killing intent in Soren's eyes. Although he knew that he might make the followers of the Storm Lord angry, he did not care so much. There was no way to survive in the outer islands if he was afraid of everything. Soren put on the clothes he took off one by one. The Naga Siren looked at him coldly. After Soren put on everything, she slowly said, "Come with me. I will tell you all the information about those who betrayed their faith, and then I will prepare some useful things for you. There are also pirates secretly supported by the temple in Port Tylon. They will help you when you need them. But you must remember one thing. Betrayers are the most hated thing by the sea goddess. You must kill them all. You must not leave a single one alive. Remember, you must not leave any alive. Otherwise, the sea goddess may be dissatisfied." The Naga Siren repeated the words "not leaving any alive" several times in a row. It seemed that she had a clear understanding of the character of the sea goddess. This was the style of the evil gods. Soren was not surprised by this. He nodded silently and said, "I know. Don't leave any alive. No matter men or women, old or young, there is no mercy in mercy. Those who betray their faith must pay with their lives." The Naga Siren finally showed a smile. She looked at Soren with satisfaction, as if she appreciated his coldness at the moment. Her voice softened a little and said, "The enemy is a little tricky, but it is not impossible. There are a lot of them, so you may need a little strategy. Look. This is their list. Some of them will sail at sea soon. This is a good opportunity. Maybe you can sneak in and kill them all." Chapter 192. How did you know that I overslept today? The second part is worse. Outside the Sea Temple, Soren's figure came out of the darkness. There was an emblem in his palm, which was given to him by the Naga Siren before he left. This was an extraordinary item with a special function. At the same time, it was also a prop to order the pirates controlled by the temple to assist him. This was a hidden special emblem. There were no characteristics of the Sea Temple on it. It was just engraved with a little jellyfish-like rune. Before leaving, the Naga Siren leaned over and kissed Soren's forehead. At the same time, she whispered a sentence in the sea language. This was a blessing ceremony. It was not similar to the blessing of the misfortune goddess, but a weaker version of a temporary blessing. It was said that after being kissed on the forehead by the priest of the sea goddess, even if you encounter fierce sea monsters after entering the sea, they may not attack you. This kind of blessing had no attribute bonus, unless it was an official blessing of the sea goddess. That kind of blessing was the real blessing. You would not encounter storms and waves in the sea. It did not matter if you encountered them. The sea would hold up your ship and protect you and your servants. The sea monsters would stay away from you, ignore you, and never take the initiative to attack you. Even to a certain extent, after meeting certain conditions, you could also order those sea monsters in the name of the sea goddess. At present, one of the 3 pirate kings of the Soros Islands could control sea monsters. If the Naga siren did not kiss Soren, he would immediately be attacked by the giant octopus in the pond outside. But now if he jumped in, the giant octopus would only ignore him. In the future, if he encountered sharks or sea monsters in the sea, these sea creatures may ignore him. This was the blessing of the sea priest. Generally, this kind of blessing could only be obtained after a god sacrifice ceremony or after a large amount of money was offered. This was a temporary blessing which could last for about a week. The emblem that Soren got was special. It was an extraordinary item with permanent spells. It was the kind of item that hardly increased combat power, but sometimes it was very useful. Item type: Drowned emblem, incomplete item, item grade. Rare, grade 2. Item description: this is a special emblem ornament. The priest of the goddess of ocean permanently imprinted the spell, underwater breathing, on it. When wearing this equipment, no creature would die from drowning. It also had a special ability that could help the wearer go deeper into the sea and reduce the effects of the deep sea on the wearer. The emblem seemed to be a part of an item. It was obvious that it had once been embedded in a piece of equipment. Prerequisites: non-equipment effect, permanent, underwater breathing spell. The wearer can breathe in any water environment. Special effects: toughness in deep sea areas +2, diving ability increased, resistance to special sea environment +2. In the shadow of the night. Soren frowned and played with the emblem of the drowned. For some reason he felt that the pattern on it was a little familiar, as if he had seen it somewhere before. Things that could leave an impression on him were not simple, especially things near the sea. In his memory, there were high-grade legendary items near the Soros Islands. He just didn't know if the emblem in his hand had anything to do with that item. It was obviously a part of an item, and Soren couldn't tell if there were no other parts. If it was really a part of that item, it was worth Soren's risk to try. Because the power of that item was almost comparable to an artifact. It could also summon a legendary deep-sea monster at a critical moment. That thing was simply heaven-defying at sea. To put it more exaggeratedly, he could kill a pirate king's fleet by himself. Soren was full of energy. He didn't even have the thought of sleeping. So he didn't rush back to the inn. Instead, he tested his ability a little. He held a kindler between his fingers. The kindler rolled on his fingertips at an astonishing speed. In the end, it almost turned into a shadow. When he clenched his hand, the kindler had disappeared and emerged from his other hand. It was beyond the limit of the retina. Even Soren himself couldn't see his own small and swift movements. The dexterity of his hands was almost comparable to the top magicians in his previous life. And this was only a part of the legendary skill, omnipotent hands. Of course, the test was more than that. Soren still couldn't test the omnipotent hand's ability to use any equipment, so he could only try to improve his thief skills after his recovery ability. In theory, with the omnipotent hands, even if the thief skill wasn't very high, it could reach the level of a thief. Because the dexterity of his hands was so high, the dexterity bonus it could provide was more amazing than the skill points. Looks like I've recovered my dagger skills. The dagger in Soren's hand left a trail of afterimages, then disappeared into the black silk glove. His best weapon was the curved sword, but it was a combat weapon. Soren's second best weapon was the dagger. Not only was it useful in combat, but it could also be used in many other ways. For example, the scene in front of him. 2 patrolling guards walked past Soren. A cold light flashed in his hand. His fingers instantly turned into a blur, and then he brushed past them as if nothing had happened. The distance between them increased by 50 meters. A money pouch appeared in Soren's hand. He lightly weighed it in his hand, then put it away. The patrolling guard was still walking forward. He didn't even know when the inner lining of his clothes had been cut open, and when the money pouch hanging on his waist had been stolen. His outer leather armor was still intact, but the inner lining near the money pouch had been cut open. If he hadn't suddenly remembered something, or if someone else had reminded him, he probably wouldn't have realized that he had been robbed until he finished patrolling. Sure enough, the omnipotent hands is the best choice for a thief. What Soren cared about was not the money at all, nor the omnipotent hand's ability to steal. The patrolling guards were all close to grade 2 professions. Just now, he was able to quietly cut a hole in the guard's clothes. If Soren wanted to, he could also silently use the dagger to instantly pierce their kidneys, then cause them to bleed profusely, and then die in a short period of time. He didn't even need to use stealth. He could directly injure or even kill the target before they could react. This was the bonus of being the first to attack. Although there was no specific data, the bonus of 5 points for being the first to attack seemed to exist. Soren's speed was much faster than other people. Among all the melee professions, rogues were the fastest to attack. Even monks couldn't compare to them. Monks were better at short bursts of continuous attacks. Soren returned to the hotel. It was late at the moment, but there were still many people in the hotel's lobby. When Soren opened the door, the Amazonian women who were drinking in the lobby looked up. One of them seemed to be the strong woman who fought in the tavern during the day. She seemed to be mocking how she beat up the group of men today, and then beat them up until they were all listless. The other party spoke in an Amazonian dialect, and Soren basically couldn't understand. He could only guess the meaning from the vague words. One of the women was the executioner who molested Soren today. She had changed her clothes now. The other party was wearing clothes similar to a battle group, but the outside armor was removed. Inside was a leather shirt, and half of her full breasts could be seen. The Amazonian women were relatively strong, and belonged to the kind of women full of wildness. Their breasts were not as soft as other women, but they were definitely firm and full of elasticity. This group of women only had muscles left. Basically, all the women in front of him had more obvious muscle contours on their arms. They were not as exaggerated as bodybuilders, but they were definitely stronger than ordinary men's arms. The average strength of the Amazonian women was about 14 to 16 points. In other words, although the muscles on this group of women were not very exaggerated, most of them had a good bloodline, and their strength was almost higher than Soren's. When she saw Soren, a playful smile appeared on the corner of her mouth, and then she said a few words to the other women in Amazonian dialect. Soren didn't know what she said, but the other women immediately laughed for a while, and then glanced at Soren with a strange playful gaze. Many of them were looking at his lower body, whispering something in their companions' ears with some kind of mischievous smile, and then there was a burst of inexplicable laughter. Soren couldn't help but frown. He was a little dissatisfied with the other party's attitude. Even the female drows knew to respect strong males, and the Amazonian woman in front of him was too unscrupulous. He had to show a little of his strength or they would think that he was weak and easy to bully. Soren had a cold smile on the corner of his mouth. He slowly walked in front of the female executioner, then looked at her, who was slightly drunk, and said slowly, "Are you interested in performing a magic trick with me?" The woman with long dark red hair stood up with interest, as if she was not afraid of Soren at all. "Sure. Are you still a bard? Ah, can you sing? Do you want to sing me a song?" Soren didn't say anything. When the woman in front of him stood up, he suddenly narrowed his eyes, and then a cold light slid through his fingertips, followed by a series of afterimages. When Soren withdrew his fingers and turned to leave, he left a group of stunned Amazonian warriors, and a naked woman with a dazed expression. She seemed to have just sobered up and she had goosebumps all over her body. She was naked, and the ground under her feet was covered with clothes. They didn't even see clearly that their companion in front of them had been stripped naked. Soren calmly walked to the stairs, and then as if he remembered something, he turned around and said, "Oh, that's right. This magic trick is called stripping." After that he calmly left. All that was left was a group of female Amazon warriors who had yet to recover from their shock. Chapter 193. There was still dead silence in the hall. One of the female Amazons picked up the battle skirt on the ground with a shocked expression. After looking at the neatly cut belt, she murmured, "What a fast speed! How was this a stripping technique?" It was simply because the opponent's speed was too fast. Before they could react, he had already stripped off their companion's clothes. And when he cut the belt of the battle skirt and the inner shirt belt, he did not cut the skin of their companion at all. This kind of accuracy and speed was completely incredible to them. The red-haired woman shuddered after Soren stopped, and her whole body was covered with goosebumps. She felt the cold touch of the tip of the sword on her skin, but it did not directly cut the surface of the skin. This was a skill that they could not understand at all. An Amazon woman with long brown hair took a deep breath and slowly said, "What a powerful rogue. Report him to the higher-ups and receive him carefully. We don't need to offend this kind of person. He may be useful in the future." Strength was the only way to gain respect. Even the female Amazons who liked to suppress males to inflate their ego knew that they should respect men who were strong enough. These women were despicable. If you didn't let them understand what strength was, these women would always look at you with contempt. If the drows were the killers among the females, then the Amazons were the hooligans among the females. To deal with this kind of woman, you should whip them when you need to, and slap them in the face when you need to. Otherwise they would be even more unscrupulous. Only when you show your strength, these women will give you the respect you deserve. On the stairs, Soren put away his palm and there was a playful smile on his mouth. He seemed to be talking to himself. I finally got back some of the feeling of the past, but I don't know when I can reach the level where the legendary Blade Master used a straight blade to block bullets in the Battle of Golems, but the distance should not be too far, right? When I was at my peak, I should be able to remove the other party's clothes and shave her lower body hair as well. It seems that there is still a big gap. Soren certainly did not have such peak skills now. Shaving would definitely cut the target's skin. Legendary skill. Any ability with the legendary mark was definitely not simple, let alone the specialty of a rogue. After Soren recovered his omnipotent hands ability, although his profession level was only around grade 3, his real combat power could reach the level of grade 4 or above. As long as he took one more step forward, he estimated that he would be able to reach the strength of a quasi-legendary tier at the 4th step. The speed of his strength improvement would be much faster than in the past. It was a pity that he didn't have the evasion intuition ability, and he didn't have the triple evasion ability stacking. In the end he still couldn't reach his peak strength. Instinctive dodge. Without superior perception, how could he master the dodge intuition ability? Soren frowned and thought for a moment. Then he slowly pushed open the door. After taking a glance at the scene in the room, he immediately closed the door and quickly walked towards Vivian. The scene in front of him was a little frightening. Vivian's petite body was floating about 3 feet above the bed. She was wearing a black princess dress, and her hair was gently dancing in the wind. There were obviously other things floating around her such as tables, chairs, wooden stools, accessories and so on. Her divine power was out of control. This was not the first time Soren had seen it. Sometimes the little girl would inexplicably fly when she was sleeping at night. Sometimes even Soren might fly and sometimes it would cause damage. However, when Soren was by her side, the number of times she lost control of her divine power was obviously much less. There seemed to be an invisible energy field in the room. Soren put all the suspended things back on the ground, then reached out and hugged Vivian's small body in his arms. The little girl was still sleeping, but she seemed to be able to perceive the outside world. Her expression became soft, and her breathing gradually became stable. She was actually conscious and perceptive. It was just that Soren couldn't be sure why she was sleeping. The last time she slept like this for a long time, she didn't wake up until a certain time. Give me a little more time. Soren reached out and hugged Vivian's small body in his arms, then leaned over and kissed her forehead and slowly said, I still don't have the confidence to completely suppress the divinity of fear. I need some time to prepare. It won't take too long, I promise. Soren got up and covered the sleeping little girl with a blanket, then sat next to her and stroked her long hair. The invisible energy field around them gradually dissipated, and everything seemed to have returned to normal. Soren silently took out a scroll and looked at it. From time to time he would look at the sky outside. Since he had agreed to the request of the sea priest, he had to do it. Otherwise he might be cursed by the sea goddess. The other party didn't give him a long time, and Soren wasn't interested in wasting too much time. It was a group of merchants who betrayed their faith, and behind them was the Duchess of the Principality of Rossard. Soren had heard of this woman. Not only was she beautiful, but he had also heard of her amazing wealth and her extremely vicious heart. It was said that the old Duke of the Principality of Rossard was poisoned to death by her. Of course this was only a rumor. But now she was the ruler of the duchy. She was the third wife of the old Duke. The old Duke's sons had all been killed by her, one by one. Now only the little princess was left. The reason why Soren remembered this woman was that many people called her a Wu Zetian character, and a lot more ruthless. Later on, this woman launched a war against the other principalities, and almost unified the southwest countries. She came from an ancient sorcerer family, and had a very deep background. It seemed that sorcerer families could easily cultivate people with strange temperaments. Maybe it was because they had to step into many forbidden areas in order to maintain the purity of their bloodline. This woman was not simple. She had been desperately accumulating wealth, and at the same time secretly recruited many adventurers from the evil faction. The reason why the merchants betrayed their faith was very simple, and that was for more benefits. Although the goddess of ocean could bless their ships to sail on the sea, she could not bring more benefits. This group of people changed their faith to the Lord of Storms because they wanted to open up a trade route in the tropical rainforest area, and strengthen the trade cooperation with the rainforest area through the faith of the Lord of Storms. They needed the gold of the Soros Islands. As long as the faith of the Lord of Storms opened the way, they could trade with any town or tribe on the Soros Islands that believed in the Lord of Storms. After all, the sea goddess' faith on land was definitely not as strong as the Lord of Storms. The Lord of Storms also had the ability to protect the ships at sea, so that his believers could avoid the damage of the storm, and at the same time, use the divine imprint to deter the sea monsters. All of this was for more benefits. However, they probably did not expect the sea goddess to retaliate so soon. The other party betrayed their faith during this period of time, and the opportunity to betray their faith might be because they lost contact with the gods during this period of time. If the sea goddess also fell asleep, they might be able to escape punishment and anger. However, they obviously underestimated the revenge of the goddess believers. The night was getting darker. Soren put away the file and glanced at Vivian. He leaned over and kissed her on the cheek and then said, "I'll be back soon." After that, he turned and opened the window and then quietly left. Shortly after Soren left, Vivian's petite body floated up again. The window that was closed before he left trembled slightly, and then objects floated up to a height of 3 feet. The whole room was once again shrouded by an invisible force. If Gloria was here, she would find everything so familiar. It was because she lost control of her divine power that she opened an energy shield to isolate Vivian's power. The suspended objects were slowly flying, and Vivian's petite body gradually floated to the center. Under the bright moonlight, Soren moved closer to the port. The caravan controlled by the Duchess was very powerful, and there might be high-grade wizards in it. She owned a lot of minerals and had been secretly smuggling arms, slaves, food and so on. She controlled the power of the Principality of Rossard, but all the profits from the trade fell into her private pocket. The internal finances of the Principality were still tight. There were rumors that the army of the Principality of Rossard was not as strong as her personal guards. Soren was not very clear about her strength. He only knew that she had 5 private legions under her name. No one had seen her fight, but some guessed that she was a dragon disciple. The port was very quiet. At this time, almost everyone was asleep. Soren moved along the shadows and gradually approached the location of the target chamber of commerce. The other party had 7 large ships, and the number of sailors and guards was more than 500 people. This was a tricky task. 5 of the ships had already set off after the last sacrifice of the gods, and the ones left in Port Tylon were other people. Soren's first goal was to kill these people, completely destroy their stronghold, and then kill them all when the others came back. The pirates under the control of the Sea Temple had spread out, and as soon as the fleet came back, he would receive the news immediately. There were guards standing guard at the Chamber of Commerce's station. Soren quietly crept over, and then a cold light flashed, and a body with its throat cut was gently placed on the ground by him. Soren gently landed on the roof with his curved swords, and then smeared the venom of the wyvern on the swords. Then he loaded the crossbow one by one, and then put the throwing swords into the master battlemaster gloves. With a light leap, he landed in the courtyard. Then he slipped back into the shadows and quietly approached the patrolling guards. He did not alarm anyone. This was just an appetizer, and the real hunt had just begun. Chapter 194. Under the cold moonlight. 2 guards of the Rosad Chamber of Commerce were patrolling. Because the Chamber of Commerce had stored a lot of goods, the security here had always been very tight. It was quite tiring at this time. 2 guards of the caravan were chatting, talking about which house in Port Tylon had the prettiest prostitutes. Basically, starting from middle age, these people who relied on force to make a living would turn to more stable jobs. The caravan went out to sea with some young guards, and the more mature ones were used to stay behind and guard because they had more experience. The shadow and the darkness twisted. The older guard, who might be in his 40s, stopped in his tracks. His intuition was strong after a long time of fighting, and he almost immediately wanted to pull out his weapon. Unfortunately, it was too late. A scimitar with a cold gleam pierced through his back, almost coming out of his body. Then, another scimitar swung towards the person next to him, chopping off his head on the spot and breaking it in half. Because he used his left hand, Soren did not directly cut off the head. He only cut off the neck bone and there was still a piece of flesh attached to the neck. The whole bloody head was hanging on the back and it would be cut off by another 3 centimeters. Blood gushed out in large amounts. Soren raised his leg to support the fallen body with a cold expression, avoiding the obvious sound of collision. He gently pulled out the curved sword, and then dragged the 2 bodies to the corner. So far he had not found enough enemies to threaten him. The enemies he had killed so far were at grade 3. Except for a more troublesome trap near the warehouse, most of the people had fallen asleep. Many of them were strong ordinary people, and the main force of the caravan seemed to have gone out to sea. Soren had killed 26 people. The smell of blood in the air had become much stronger. If someone woke up, they might be discovered. There was not much time left for him. The cold killing intent was gathering little by little. Every time he killed an enemy, the cold light in Soren's eyes condensed. He had no mercy in his heart. After quietly entering a room, he immediately waved his sword and killed the 5 people sleeping inside. One of them seemed to have woken up, but before he could react, a cold light had already chopped off his head. Soren quietly sheathed his sword and retreated. The courtyard was quite large and he had to kill the other targets as soon as possible. Who? The smell of blood was getting stronger and stronger, and it finally alerted the experts in the Chamber of Commerce. In the backyard, a fierce-looking man suddenly opened his eyes and picked up the weapon beside the bed. He pushed open the door and looked around. He immediately let out a loud shout. Then a chaotic sound rang out nearby. Following that, a dozen men holding swords and weapons rushed out with disheveled clothes. This man seemed to be an important figure in the Chamber of Commerce. The others gathered around him. At the same time he ordered, "Enemy invasion. Wake the others up." The shadow behind him twisted. An inexplicable chill made all the hairs on his body stand on end, and he couldn't help but feel stiff. When he lowered his head to look at his chest, a machete had already pierced through his heart. The bone-piercing chill seeped into his blood vessels, and he could see wisps of frost appearing on the wound. Soren didn't cover his face. Since he wanted to kill all the targets, there was no need for him to cover his face. After finishing off the warrior who was about grade 3, Soren raised his finger and shot out a wave of arcane missiles. A thug who couldn't react in time was instantly hit in the head. His nose was directly blown off, and the center of his face was caved in. This was just an ordinary person. Maybe it was a warrior who had just advanced. Such an enemy couldn't even take one hit from him. Brute strength. Although he killed the leader of the Chamber of Commerce in one hit, the number of people alone still gave the other guards a little courage. Obviously, someone wanted to sound the alarm bell, but unfortunately he was shot dead by Soren's crossbow. Omnipotent hands enhanced his accuracy, and he shot the enemy in the head on the spot. Soren pulled out his other curved sword and dashed toward the dozen or so guards in front of him. He leaped up and stepped on the roof beam, causing the beam to tremble. In an instant, his curved sword slashed through the air and slit the throats of 2 of the guards. A trace of fear spread. Obviously, many people were frightened, and at the same time, some wanted to escape and ask for help. Soren's expression was quite cold. He directly rushed toward the enemies who were 10 times his number, and then blood splattered in the sky and broken limbs fell to the ground. After a minute and a half, Soren sheathed his sword. Behind him were 12 corpses with their throats cut. There was a scream of horror in the dark, which alarmed the other chambers of commerce nearby, but it seemed that no one dared to come over. The smell of blood in the air had become very strong. Soren took out the crossbow expressionlessly and shot the target, who screamed. There were not many living people left. He glanced around coldly, then lit a torch and threw it directly toward the warehouse. The mission given by the Naga Siren priest was to kill all of them. He did not have much time to clean up the battlefield. He could only pick up some valuable things and take them away, then kill the rest of the targets. This was only the first clearing point. He had to burn the ships in the port later. It must be done within half an hour. Otherwise, the guards of Port Tylon may be dispatched. Although he was helping the Sea Temple deal with the betrayers, it was not suitable to fight directly with the guards. Port Tylon, the port. Soren threw the corpse with its throat cut into the sea, and then jumped to the surface of the sea. He jumped from a height of more than 10 meters, but he did not fall into the sea. Instead, he jumped directly on the surface of the sea, and then jumped 10 meters away as if he was stepping on the ground. This was the power of levitation. This spell was used by wizards to levitate, but for rogues, it had the effect of a top-notch lightness skill. Soren did not need to be completely levitated. He only needed to levitate to transfer the force, and he could complete many super difficult movements. For example, the ability to climb was considered useless by many people. But for Soren, as long as he jumped, he could grab an object with one hand and jump 360 degrees, and a group of enemies below would be stunned. Many basic abilities could not be ignored in battle. Rumble. There was a loud noise, and then two large ships turned into a sea of fire. One of them had begun to sink. Soren frowned and looked at the blood all over his body, and then disappeared into the darkness. The first wave of cleansing today had been completed. Presumably, his performance should be able to satisfy the Naga Siren priest because there were almost no survivors tonight. Soren's targets were about to reach 3 digits. Once upon a time he was also able to dance unparalleled in the crowd. Port Tylon was not calm today. Because people had died last night and many of them had died. The stronghold of the Rosad Chamber of Commerce near the port was completely wiped out. There were more than 50 people inside and not a single one was left alive. Most of them had their throats slit. There was almost no trace of resistance throughout the entire process. It was almost a one-sided massacre. Moreover, at dawn their ship, which was docked near the harbor, caught fire. The sailors on board were either burned to death or had their throats slit. Only a few people who went out to seek pleasure survived, but they were already scared out of their wits and no one knew where they were hiding. The whole Port Tylon was shaken. Overnight, the name Throat Cutter spread throughout the port, causing many vicious and merciless bastards to tremble. Nearly 100 lives were lost. To be able to kill so many people in one night, it was definitely a quasi-legendary assassin. There was no trace of a large-scale attack at the scene. The killer could be just one person. People with discerning eyes could see that there was the shadow of the Sea Temple behind this, because the guards of Port Tylon were just cleaning up the mess and had no intention of catching the murderer. The only ones who moved were the followers of the Storm Lord. After all, the group of merchants had converted to the Storm Lord. If they did not do anything, it would definitely dampen the enthusiasm of the followers. People with a little eyesight knew that this was a competition between the two temples. No one would be crazy enough to get involved in such a battle. Because it was too dangerous. The Sea Temple. Soren's figure appeared in the shadows. The Naga Siren had been waiting here for a long time. There was a smile on her dark green face and she said slowly, "Very good. I am very satisfied with your efficiency. This group of betrayers deserves such a thunderous punishment. You don't have to worry about the other fish that escaped the net. I will arrange for people to kill them. You need to be careful recently. The followers of the Storm Lord seem to be on the move. They are tracking down who killed the group of betrayers. But it doesn't matter too much. The power of the Sea Goddess cannot be underestimated. They will not directly attack you. At most, they will hire some adventurers. I will secretly send people to help you, and the other party will not dare to fight openly. The faith of the goddess has been stabilized. Those who were ready to change their faith have all been honest. It seems that they should understand the consequences of betraying the faith of the Sea Goddess. You come with me. You should be rewarded for your performance last night. I have also prepared some helpers for you. Maybe you are interested in serving the Sea Goddess. Whether it is wealth or power, the Sea Temple can give you what you want. The belief of evil gods did not require love, but only awe and fear from the followers. The Naga Siren priest smiled and led Soren to the back of the hall. It seemed that after killing the first batch of targets, her mood had become better. More importantly, the group of people who were ready to move because of benefits were all honest. Fear could keep faith for a long time. In the future, no matter who wanted to betray the faith of the Sea Goddess, they would have to think about their end today. However, the deterrence last night was not enough. These guys had to be afraid of the consequences of betraying their faith. The killing should not stop. More blood must be used to tell them the price of betraying their faith. The reputation of the Sea Goddess had never been born out of kindness. Chapter 195. The Naga Siren priest led Soren down the temple. Soren calmly followed behind. Although he didn't get much slaughter EXP from last night's battle, Soren had obtained a special background ability. That was the advanced assassin ability, Heart of Slaughter. The main force of the Rosad Chamber of Commerce went to the Soros Islands for the arms trade. Most of the people who stayed behind were ordinary sailors and guards. Last night, he encountered 2 professions above grade 3, and the rest were all grade 1 or grade 2 or even ordinary sailors. To the current Soren, all enemies with a profession level of 10 grade 3, and below were simply a one-sided slaughter. Only enemies with a profession level of 15 grade 4, and above could cause him some trouble. Heart of Slaughter, background ability. You have become accustomed to death and blood after killing again and again. Ending a life is not difficult or scary for you. Hundreds of lives have been ended in your hands. You have begun to ignore death. In battle, you will awaken the ability of the heart of slaughter. This will make you have no mercy for your enemies. Even spells such as friendly spells will not affect your judgment. Permanent will +1. This was the prerequisite ability of the quasi-legendary ability, Slaughter Instinct. If he mastered the special ability, Slaughter Instinct, Soren would be able to retain his fighting ability unconsciously. For example, after being attacked by spells such as Confusion, Misdirection, Frenzy, and so on, even if Soren couldn't pass the test of spell immunity, his body and will would be controlled by the Slaughter Instinct, and automatically enter the state of killing. This ability was very difficult to train to obtain. Those who could master it were almost all strong people who walked out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. At present, he didn't know how to train to obtain it. Basically, there were very few people who mastered this ability and no one would announce it. Heart of Slaughter had 2 opportunities to advance. One was the background ability, Slaughterer, and the other was the evil faction's top killing ability, Deathwalker. 100 heads, 500 heads, 1000 heads. These 3 background abilities were independent. That was to say, obtaining the Slaughterer ability would not replace the Heart of Slaughter ability. The 2 background abilities could be stacked. The top killing background ability was Deathwalker. This was actually a legendary level background ability. Although it could improve a lot of abilities, it was also vulnerable to attacks from the good faction. There were actually many corresponding background abilities such as the good faction's Radiant Messenger, Drul's Nature's Balancer, and so on. There were actually a lot of background abilities. Many people born in the North were born with the background ability, Northlander, which gave them 1 point bonus in cold resistance and will. There was a fishy smell of seawater in the air. Soren seemed to have smelled something strange and could not help but frown slightly. The Naga Siren priest didn't seem to care. She led Soren all the way into the basement. There were many underground passages inside the sea temple. The interior of the building was completely erected in the sea. There were traces of artificial transformation that extended hundreds of meters underground. The sound of water dripping could be heard. The Naga Siren priest led Soren to a platform. Then she stopped in place and let out a low and strange chant. The seawater in front of them seemed to be boiling. 3 strange creatures gradually appeared in front of Soren, swimming out of the dark blue sea. This is? Soren's expression was a little surprised. He murmured, "This is the aura of the undead? What are they?" There were 3 twisted monsters in front of Soren. The first looked a bit like a shark man, but the skin on its body had some traces of decay. There were also shells and seaweed growing out of its flesh. The second creature looked a bit like a Naga Siren, but it only had a pair of arms. It looked similar to the previous one. It seemed to have died, but for some reason, it turned into an undead in the sea. The last one was a cold and evil banshee. Her predecessor should be a ghost, but for some reason she was transformed into a banshee. Don't be surprised. The Naga Siren priest's mouth showed a hint of pride. She slowly said, "The sea is full of danger and death. The sea goddess also dominates the realm of death in the sea. They are all slaves of the sea goddess. Now they are your helpers." The group of betrayers seems to have drawn in the natives who believe in the storm. It is difficult for you to defeat them alone, so I will send stronger helpers to help you destroy them. Come with me. The Naga Siren priest reached out and grabbed Soren's arm, then opened a portal. The next moment, their figures appeared on a vast sea. Many reefs could be seen nearby, and something could be vaguely seen at the bottom of the sea. There were a large number of sunken ships near the island. This seemed to be an ancient route. Before the trade route of the Soros Islands was completely understood, many ships had hit the reefs and sunk here. Vaguely, there was a whirlpool-like force at the bottom of the sea. Luo. The Naga Siren priest sang in a strange tone. It seemed to be some kind of sea language. Even if Soren was a genius, he could not understand the language of the sea species, so he could not even understand the meaning of a word. However, he seemed to find that there was a power in this language. An invisible energy wave shook the sea, and then he could feel an energy field spreading out to a radius of hundreds of meters. One great white shark after another appeared in the vicinity. These huge sea monsters surrounded them in the distance. They were the most common dangerous creatures in the ocean. Small ships could be destroyed by them directly. The shark men domesticated a lot of great white sharks, some of which could even reach the size of whales. They were some kind of mutated sea monsters that were close to the legendary level of challenge. There seemed to be something moving on the bottom of the sea, followed by waves. Some creatures that looked like Naga sirens but were not Naga sirens appeared. They did not have much breath of living creatures. They looked like corpses that were mixed with marine algae creatures after death. They were a bit like modified ghouls, but they were much stronger than them. Rumble. There was a loud noise on the bottom of the sea, and then a mast broke out of the waves, followed by a very broken but intact ghost ship covered with seaweed and rotten wood. Ghosts appeared on the deck, and then they were sucked into the rotten wood of the ship by a huge force. Then the whole ghost ship began to repair as if it was resurrected. Some undead creatures that looked neither human nor ghost stood up, and then came to the deck of the ghost ship one by one. A fog rose from the sea around as if the smell of death had shrouded here. This is the ghost fleet. The Naga siren priest showed a cruel smile on the corner of her mouth. She handed something like a conch horn to Soren and said in a deep voice, "The sea goddess has scattered the ghost fleet to various temples. Although I can only mobilize one of them, it should be enough to help you kill those betrayers." As if pushed by an invisible force, the ghost ship with black sails quietly came in front of the two. The Naga siren priest grabbed Soren's hand and took him to the ghost ship. Then she looked at the undead sailors in front of her, and a strange light appeared in her eyes. The undead sailors knelt down one by one, and the whole ghost ship was dead silent. Only the cold wind blew and Soren could not help but shiver. This ship had a life of its own. It was alive. It was a living creature that had been animated by legendary spells. It was a bit like the animated castle and animated thaling made by high-grade wizards. Soren felt very uncomfortable. It was as if he was standing on the corpse of a rotten dark creature. He could even feel the ghost ship breathing the smell of death. The Naga siren priest handed the horn to Soren and said in a deep voice, "From today on, it will be under your command. Human. Don't let me down." Soren reached out and took the horn, and suddenly a dense stream of data appeared in front of his eyes. After a while, the stream of data in front of him gradually disappeared, and then a series of data appeared. Creature name, ghost ship, dead man's voice, creature type. Animated ghost ship. Creature description. This is a battleship that sank hundreds of years ago. It woke up at the bottom of the sea, and the souls and wraiths of the dead gradually assimilated with it, turning it into a ghost ship that roams the sea. There are many legends about it, and finally it attracted the attention of the believers of the sea goddess. The legendary priests captured these ghost ships, and then secretly animated these ghost ships into low-level undead life forms under the divine power of the sea goddess. It has a simple consciousness and can restore itself like the undead. This ghost ship can sail in any sea, and its power is terrifying in the sea. Captain, Soren, temporary, sailor, drowned undead, 49 people, ocean wraith, 12 people, ocean specter, 72 people, Naga banshee, 9 people, undead sharkman, 6 people, bound spirit of the dead speaker, 872 people. Equipment, drowning howl, ram, cannon of the dead, 24 pieces, ghost sails, boomerang cannons, 2 pieces. Skills, summon fog, ghost ship characteristics, underwater navigation, spirit binding characteristics, animated life, animated ropes, cursed hull, dead man's voice. Soren took the horn with some surprise, but there was a storm in his heart. Sure enough, the ghost fleet really existed. Chapter 196. Well, as soon as I finished writing the last chapter, someone found the model of the undrowned. Speaking of which, it's a pity that a girl's pictures are so bad. On the quiet sea, the dead man's voice sailed silently. Next to Soren was the proud Naga siren priest. She seemed to be satisfied with his shock after seeing the ghost ship. As the order was given, the dead man's voice suddenly shook, and then the deck of the ship began to separate. Invisible souls swam in the hull, and then the whole ghost ship began to sink slowly. The seawater came in from all directions and a cable flew like a long snake, and then wrapped around Soren's arm. The first wave of the seawater hit. Soren's figure shook a little, and then his whole body entered the sea. The dead man's voice sailed on the bottom of the sea, and all kinds of sea creatures could be seen around it. The undrowned souls were scattered around the deck, maintaining the operation of the ghost ship. The speed of the seafloor sailing was not slow. The Naga siren priest looked around with satisfaction and then said, "This ghost ship will be on standby at any time. When the group of betrayers comes back, you will ambush them from the bottom of the sea." Understood. Soren nodded gently. It seemed that the power of the sea goddess was more powerful than he thought. The goddess not only touched the realm of life but also the realm of death. Although it was only limited to the sea, wasn't the thing she was plotting too much? What did she want? Soren suddenly had the illusion of seeing another queen of spiders rise. Because the area where he was active was not by the sea, he didn't know much about the sea goddess. But he knew that the goddess had always been active in the sea, and there were not many gods who could threaten her. Even if she lost her divine power and turned into a saint, how many people in the world could kill her in the sea? However, she didn't seem to have made any earth-shattering moves, did she? As a god with the sea as the core, the sea goddess also had a limitation. It was difficult for her to expand her faith to the land. This was also the reason why she had always been suppressed by the Storm Lord. Soren smelled a conspiracy, but he didn't know what the sea goddess was plotting. Outside the sea temple, Soren's figure emerged from the shadows and left the place without a sound. The core belief of the Storm Lord was in the tropical rainforest area of the Soros Islands, which was also a place where natural storms were frequent. Although there was a temple of the Storm Lord in Port Tylon, the power mobilized was definitely not comparable to the sea temple. After all, Port Tylon was an offshore island and was directly part of the sea. What the Temple of Storm could mobilize was limited to the local believers. If the Temple of Sea interfered slightly, they would not even be able to borrow the garrison power of Port Tylon. The rumor of the throat cutter was still brewing. There was a sense of panic spreading in Port Tylon. Many taverns were discussing who the terrible throat cutter was. Some people even swore that he was a legendary assassin. Perhaps even the Sea Temple thought that Soren was close to the legendary level, so they tried to rope him in and borrow his power to deal with the betrayers. After all, Soren still retained a lot of his strength even when he was hit by the legendary energy absorption. This was definitely a quasi-legendary combat power in the eyes of the natives. Although there were many legendary professions, there were not many of them scattered in various areas. The entire Port Tylon, as a transit station for coastal trade, only had 2 or 3 legendary professions, and that was counting the priests of the temple. What Soren did not expect was that he unexpectedly got a legendary point. The appearance of the throat cutter, folk rumor. In early November 1675 in Port Tylon, you accepted the task of the Sea Temple to clean up the betrayers. In this battle, you killed a large number of enemies and caused panic in Port Tylon. Rumors of the throat cutter began to appear in Port Tylon and gradually spread to the coastal areas. It won't be long before many people near the south coast will hear about the legend of the throat cutter. Legendary point +1? It seemed that the legendary battle was not the only way to get legendary points. The demigod vampire should also use this means of spreading fear to tell the world about his existence in the way of folk rumors. For the time being, there was no need to force legendary points. The higher the legendary point, the higher the possibility of attracting the attention of others. Soren did not intend to stand on the stage and compete with other forces for the time being. Naturally, he would not force himself to pursue legendary points. There was still some time before the betrayers returned. Port Tylon and the Soros Islands were about a week or 2. They had been on the road for nearly a week. Soren estimated that there was still about 7 or 8 days to prepare. The preparation was naturally to deal with high-grade spellcasters. Behind the Rosad Chamber of Commerce was the Duchess. She was born in an ancient sorcerer family. Such families were often very powerful, and the wealth and power accumulated for generations could not be underestimated. In the information given to Soren by the Naga Siren priest, there were 3 targets who were obviously spellcasters. However, because he had not seen them fight, he could not determine the spellcaster level of these 3 people. Naturally, there were more sorcerers in the sorcerer family, but there was also the possibility of wizards. High-grade spellcasters were very dangerous enemies, and Soren had to be very careful. It seemed that the Sea Temple had given him a lot of helpers, but in fact, these helpers could only be used to deal with low-level combat power. The undead sailors on the Dead Man's Voice were at most grade 2 or 3. They could be used to deal with ordinary people in low-grade professions, but there was no way to threaten high-grade spellcasters. If there was a priest with a higher profession level, he could directly use Dispel the Undead on the spot, and at least half of the undead sailors would die. Only those high-grade Naga Sirens and undead Sharkmen could resist the power of Dispel the Undead. In the end, the real combat power was on the ghost ship itself. The cannon it was equipped with was the key to killing the enemy. High-grade spellcasters were not easy to deal with. That was why the Sea Temple did not prepare a group of garbage fighters, because they could not even stand in front of high-grade spellcasters. It was possible that the Sea Temple would be directly exposed as the mastermind behind the scenes. Everyone knew that this might be the work of the Sea Temple, but this matter must not be shown with sufficient evidence. This was the hidden battle of the church. Soren returned to the hotel. After the stripping incident last time, the group of Amazons were obviously more honest, especially after the rumor of the throat cutter. They looked at Soren with fear and awe. These women must have suspected that Soren was the legendary throat cutter, but there was no evidence to prove that Soren was the one. And whether it was true or not, the Sea Temple was behind the throat cutter, which was one of the oldest forces in Port Tylon. Long before Port Tylon became a trading center, the Sea Temple had already developed on this island. Not everyone was a fanatic. Most people would not be willing to involve their lives in the battle of the church unless there were benefits that they could not refuse. The power of the Sea Temple had begun to show. The network of relations that had been operating in Port Tylon for generations directly suppressed the Storm Church. Unless the Soros Islands had a storm priest above the bishop level, or a legendary storm lord came to support, the Storm Temple in Port Tylon would always be suppressed by the Sea Temple, because this was the home ground of the sea goddess. In the room, Vivian's petite figure was suspended in the air. Soren raised his hand and patted his forehead. He gently jumped up and held the little girl in his arms, and then put her on the big bed. Although he had a very high will, he had not reached the peak state of the ascetic journey of thousands of miles. Fighting against the consciousness of the Dread Lord not only required a strong will, but also a kind of invincible and unstoppable momentum. Soren walked barefoot for thousands of miles in the extremely cold Frost Kingdom. What he accumulated was not only his will, but also his own momentum, which was a kind of power of belief. Now he lacked that kind of momentum. Without the kind of power of belief that broke out at the peak after being forced into a desperate situation, he was not confident enough to destroy the consciousness of the Dread Lord. That was why he was still waiting for an opportunity. Soren would only act when he had at least 80% confidence. The room quickly returned to its original state. Soren sat by the bed and gently stroked Vivian's long hair. The little girl's breathing was a lot more stable after he came back, and the things that were suspended in the air all fell back to the ground. Soren got a lot of slaughter EXP from last night's battle. Although the enemy was not very strong, the number of slaughter EXP accumulated during this period of time had reached more than 15,000. This amount of EXP was not enough for him to level up his Shadow Dancer profession, but it was enough for Soren to level up his Wizard profession to level 7. After leveling up, he would obtain a level 4 spell slot, which could be used to memorize the most important wizard spells, Stone Skin, and Greater Invisibility. Without a doubt, Soren's choice was Greater Invisibility. Because he had the legendary elemental stone, Earth, this equipment could activate a Stone Skin spell once every 3 days, which temporarily replaced Soren's need for defensive spells. Moreover, he had already learned invisibility, so learning Greater Invisibility could greatly reduce the time needed to analyze the spell model. Moreover, Greater Invisibility was more useful than other spells of the same level. It was one of the spells that could increase the power of a rogue. The most important point. This was because Greater Invisibility would not reveal itself when launching an attack. Soren could fight with the enemy in the state of invisibility. He had been waiting for this spell for a long time. Chapter 197. The sky gradually darkened. Soren stood up and listened to the movement outside. He could vaguely hear the screams of men. This group of Amazon women took over more than half of the prostitutes in Port Tylon. Although they were also women, when they really stepped into the gray area, they would not be soft-hearted at all. And they also secretly controlled some of the more taboo areas, such as fair-skinned and beautiful men, strong men, and so on. These gray channels could even extend to other cities near the south coast. Many aristocratic women who were either old or lonely would definitely need some interesting activities. There were even some aristocratic widows in the south coast who directly raised male slaves. In the slave black market, they selected men as if they were livestock, including the objects below. These slaves were domesticated by cruel means, and it may also involve spiritual suggestion and so on. In the end, the slaves that were cultivated were very docile. This custom was a bit like the ancient Roman period, so the reputation of the aristocrats on the south coast was not very good. The torture was still going on. Soren's hearing was much better than before, so from time to time, he could hear faint screams from the basement. The Amazons seemed to have some fights with the locals. Recently, it seemed that many people had been caught and tortured. The bodies were dealt with through special channels, so the hotel looked very calm on the surface. Soren was a little worried about being involved in the conflict between them and the local gangs, so he was thinking about whether to move to the Sea Temple. It was undoubtedly very easy for the Naga Siren priest to settle him and Vivian. The Sea Temple's secular power was very strong. The screams stopped for a moment. Soren vaguely heard the woman's voice. It seemed that the target had died because of excessive punishment. Then there was the sound of the basement door opening, followed by 3 footsteps. One of the women's footsteps was very heavy. She should be wearing heavy armor. The standard configuration of female Amazons were all heavy infantry. This group of women dared to fight with heavy cavalry on the battlefield. Soren was still impressed by them. He was not interested in other things. When he closed the window, he looked at some sneaky stairs nearby and then began to study his own spells. A row of data appeared. The wizard profession has leveled up to level 7. Received 25 INT 20 plus INT 20 to 10, *0. 5. Skill points, HP increased by 10, profession HP 4 plus, con 21 to 10, *0. 5. Without a doubt, Soren put his skill points into literacy. His highest basic skill at the moment was literacy, which had already reached 185 points. Most of it was from skill points and a small part of it was from reading books. Soren already had a good understanding of the language, customs, geography, and religion of human society. Although he wasn't as knowledgeable as a scholar, it would be easy for him to become a teacher in a noble family. Currently, secular knowledge could only raise one's lore to about 250 points. Any further would require mysticism knowledge, magic knowledge, supernatural knowledge, and planar knowledge to level up. Among them, if one wanted to reach 350 points in literacy, they would have to have a considerable amount of knowledge about the planes. In other words, he needed to travel across planes. Therefore, many wizards liked to travel to other planes, the most famous of which was the astral traveler. They were the top masters of knowledge and their footprints were all over the planes. This was not a profession. Astral traveler was a special background ability. It was a bit like a title. Soren settled his thoughts, then took out a thick stack of white paper and began to analyze the spell model of greater invisibility. He had already gotten this spell from the Sea Temple. The priest thought that he needed to use the spell scroll to fight, but she probably didn't think that Soren would use it to memorize. Soren didn't trust the Naga Siren priest very much, so he still had a lot of cards up his sleeve. The priest didn't even know that he had a high wizard level. The priest even thought that Soren was a quasi-legendary assassin because he liked to fight with poison. This was the assassin's favorite way to fight. Part-time jobs were the easiest to disguise. There were wizards who disguised as warriors or warriors who disguised as wizards. P.S. For example, Gandalf, a standard berserker who was a gray-robed wizard. In Soren's memory there was a non-native character. That guy always made people think that he was a wizard, but when he pulled out his sword, others found out that he was actually a sword saint. He was a very powerful and dangerous guy. With the super explosive power of a sword saint, coupled with the wizard's stone skin defense, and the support of comprehensive spells, his combat power was even more terrifying than Soren's current transformation. Unfortunately, he died a little too early. This guy single-handedly fought more than 10 enemies of the same level, and in the end he was killed by a dimensional anchor. He fought against 12 enemies and killed more than half of them. It was a brilliant record. Soren knew that he might not be able to do it now. Those who could become sword saints were very powerful, but they all died too early. In Soren's memory, there didn't seem to be many sword saints who had lived for a long time. Even the legendary sword saint who was worshipped by many in the Battle of the Golems was beaten to death in the end. Perhaps the legendary wizards couldn't tolerate these people who could break through their greater defensive force field with a single strike. If Soren's enemy had a sword saint, he would probably kill them first. The existence of a sword saint was a threat. Soren buried himself in analyzing the spell model. The sheets of white paper were filled with densely packed symbols. Level 4 spells were more difficult than any spell he had learned before. If he didn't learn invisibility at the beginning, he probably wouldn't even have a clue. Greater invisibility was a multi-layered spell model. The biggest difference between it and invisibility was that invisibility would be revealed after an attack, which meant that the spell effect would disappear. However, greater invisibility was still effective after an attack, and the user would still be invisible. This meant that it was quite difficult to learn. It was much more difficult than other level 4 spells of the same level. Soren could only slowly break it down and calculate the individual spell models for analysis. After the initial analysis of the spell model, Soren's progress began to speed up gradually because the model of greater invisibility was developed from invisibility. However, invisibility was a single spell model, while greater invisibility was an overlapping composite type, which was equivalent to automatically activating the effect of invisibility after an attack. This was a very high-end spell circuit system. This was the dividing line for difficult spells. Starting from level 4 spells, the difficulty of learning would increase exponentially. In the end, it would even extend to the fields of astrology, planes, space, and so on. The night passed quickly. Soren rubbed his forehead and stood up. It was almost dawn outside. He picked up a thick stack of white paper and flipped through it. Then he destroyed some of them. His progress in analyzing the spell model was only about 10%. Although it would definitely speed up as his research deepened, he didn't have much time left. Soren looked at Vivian next to him, raised his hand and stroked her cheek. Then he got up and walked downstairs. There was a faint smell of blood in the air. Soren noticed that the Amazon guard at the door had an extra wound on her arm. It wasn't there last night. There was a battle. Because he was focused on studying the spell model, Soren lowered his perception of the surroundings. It seemed that these women had fought with some forces last night. The erotic industry was always a gray area. The Amazons took such a big piece of cake, so it was normal for someone to trouble them from time to time. Soren simply took something to eat and then returned to the room. He wasn't interested in poking his nose into other people's business. Soren ate a little, then carefully fed Vivian some water and began to study the spell model again. The little girl basically didn't need to eat. At first, Soren tried to feed her. Unfortunately, she didn't seem to need anything except for drinking water occasionally. Her little face was still very rosy and she didn't feel hungry at all. In this regard, Vivian seemed to be stronger than he was now. Being able to completely sustain her own consumption with energy was already a sign of the legendary realm. Time passed little by little. Soren was busy studying greater invisibility. Occasionally, the Naga Siren priest would send him messages, and he went out several times during this period. The Amazons seemed to be fighting with a local force. There were sounds of killing and fighting in the streets at night. Soren's move to destroy the Rosad Chamber of Commerce seemed to have caused a new round of shuffling in Port Tylon. The Amazons had a larger territory. They killed a lot of people and got a bigger cake. It seemed that some people foresaw that the Rosad Chamber of Commerce would never recover from this setback. So many forces were eager to swallow up their trade shares in various fields. Even the forces that belonged to the Church of Storms did not have the slightest pity at this time because they didn't necessarily look up to those who had betrayed their faith. This kind of betrayal for greater interest would make people feel repulsed. Soren killed a lot of people that night. But because of his killing, Port Tylon had more than 10 times the number of casualties in the next week. There were even small-scale naval battles occurring in the coastal areas. Chaos arose. The guards finally couldn't stand it anymore and began to intervene in the competition for the interests of the major forces, allowing them to maintain the superficial order. So the killing began to spread at night. As for how many people died, it had nothing to do with Soren. He was happy that he had learned greater invisibility in a week. At the same time, he received news that the Rosad Chamber of Commerce's fleet had begun to return the next day. It was time for the ghost ship to set off. Soren would intercept them when they returned and bury them all in the sea. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.